white supremacy is so important to understand, and I don't think there's really anyone else better to understand it. So he is already here. Dr. Horn, thank you so much for joining me today. I love your work. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes. So, you are the author of more than 30 books. One of my favorite books, actually, is The Counter-Revolution of 1776, Slave Resistance and the Origins of the United States of America. And it is July 4th. And July 4th is the national celebration of the founding of the United States, this Declaration of Independence, which a lot of people claim is a celebration of the quote-unquote liberties and the freedoms and the quote-unquote democracy that the United States represents. But you have made an argument that has gotten a lot of backlash from even so-called far left circles, socialists, people call themselves communists, that claim that what you are doing is actually degrading the founding fathers, and that your argument that the United States, the very formation of it, was a response to an incipient trend towards abolition is completely an affront to this bourgeois revolution that we should be celebrating, this freedom from the monarchy, which unleashed capitalism and created a progressive force in the United States. I think that this is a myth of American exceptionalism myself, because I think the reality of what we're living in, the fact that racism and white supremacy is very much with us and completely shapes material conditions in the United States, especially for Black people and our indigenous brothers, sisters, and others. So could you go over this argument for us that you have made, and could you counter this? Because I think that you have such a sharp grasp on history that and in a history that isn't really taught in schools at all, when the counter argument to you, what you write about, is, I think, really what's just taught generally in textbooks with a kind of socialist veneer over it. So could you go over your argument of why the United States' formation is a counter-revolution, why it's so important to understand this on July 4th?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. Second of all, you anticipated part of the thesis I put forth in suggesting that July 4th, 1776 marks a counter-revolution, not only against an incipient trend of abolitionism in London, as represented by Somerset's case, June 1772, where Lord Mansfield suggested that slavery would no longer obtain in England. There's justifiable apprehension that that decision would leapfrog the Atlantic and jeopardize slave fortunes of a murderous row of so-called founding fathers, including Washington, Jefferson, Madison, Patrick Henry, lawyers for slave owners like John Adams. And some of the critics, when they look at abolitionism, they don't look at at the enslaved as being the abolitionists. They only look at people like themselves. And then they say, well, we didn't see any abolitionist trend erupting in London. Well, you need to look in Jamaica. You need to look at Barbados. You need to look at Antigua, for example, where the settlers were not only running the risk of losing their lives because of slave revolts, but more importantly to them, losing their investments as well, which happened finally in what we call Haiti between 1791 and 1804, which hit the settler class, not least in North America, with the force of a Category 5 hurricane. You should also know that it's not only labor that's at issue. And interestingly enough, these so-called materialists, when it comes to looking at North America, they throw materialism into the dustbin, because when you have the breaking of the law, which is basically what the settlers in North America did, there must be powerful material reasons. One, of course, is slavery. The other is land. And in 1762, 1763, there was the Royal Proclamation, where London expressed reserve, shall we say, at continuing to wage war against Native Americans, pushing west across the continent, so that land speculators, real estate speculators, like the precursor of the most recent real estate speculator, speaking of Donald Trump, now speaking of George Washington, could profit handsomely. Part of the problem with regard to historians, and particularly U.S. historians, is that many of them, they'll parachute into 1750 and pick up the story there, which is like coming into the movie in the middle of the plot and thinking that you grasp everything that has happened before. Or, as I've written previously, it reminds me of the jury in the first Rodney King case. Recall that Rodney King was the black motorist in the early 1990s. His beating savagely by officers of the law was captured on tape. That became evidence in the trial of the officers of the law. The officers' defense attorneys, rather slyly, would only show snippets of the tape, and therefore not a continuous loop. And the credulous jury would be asked, do you see any violation with regard to this snippet? Well, no. Maybe the officer just has his hand in the air and doesn't show him cracking down on Rodney King's skull. And of course, the officers were acquitted and Los Angeles went up in flames. Well, see, this is part of the problem with these historians in the United States. Now, it may be due to the repression that has been suffered by people in the United States. It may be due to the fact that people like me were barred from archives until quite recently. But in any case, you rarely have these historians go before 1750, even though English settlement, as we know, starts in 1607. And then, as you know in history, part of the issue in history is asking the right questions. One of the questions you should ask is, Spain had the first mover's advantage. After all, they sponsored Columbus in 1492. So how was it that it was London that is able to sail into what they call Virginia after the so-called Virgin Queen in 1607? And that's dealt with in my 16th century book, where I point out that Spain had established a settlement in what is now St. Augustine, Florida, as early as 1565, which of course calls into question the mythos of 1619. But in any case, they spent so much time battling the enslaved Africans who were there from the inception, not to mention the indigenous, that they wanted to confront the English as they sail into what they call Virginia in 1607, but they were too tied down, fighting the indigenous and the Africans. Which brings me to my next point, which is that Spain had a religious qualification for settlement. You had to be Catholic. You had to be religiously correct. You could be an African and be a conquistador, as the example of Cuba helps to illustrate. London adopts the Protestant faith, if you like, as early as the 1530s, which unleashes a round robin of religious conflicts in order to gain a seat at the banquet of colonial plunder. London was not able to have religion as a qualifier, being Protestant as a qualifier. There weren't that many of them early on. And so they co-opt those with whom they had been warring for centuries, the Irish, the Scots, the Welsh, and from there move from religion to race as a qualifier, which is where we're stuck today. So I understand why there are so many, particularly amongst the Euro-American community, who celebrate July 4th, because it would be foolish to deny that those who have been persecuted on the shores of Europe, the Jewish population, the Catholic population, etc., they found a refuge and a sanctuary in North America. They left out the other half of the equation, which is that there were those, such as my ancestors and the ancestors of the indigenous, who found no refuge. And in fact, like a seesaw, as these European invaders went up, we went down. And that's the sad and tragic story of 1776, a sad denouement, which we're still reenacting, I'm afraid to say, in 2021. But I'm happy to say that increasingly you have a core of Black scholars and Black creators who are challenging the creation myth. Just as you pointed out in your opening remarks, it's not necessarily all coming from the poor and disenfranchised in the Black community. I'm thinking of the filmmaker Raoul Peck of Haitian origin in his spectacular 4-part documentary series, Exterminate All the Brutes, a sweeping castigation cum analysis of settler colonialism, a term conspicuously missing from the ordinary vocabularies of many on the left. You wonder, I mean, they use it with regard to Israel and Palestine. I mean, you had European invaders who came and ousted the indigenous. I mean, isn't that settler colonialism? I mean, come on. And of course, there is the book by the scholar Tyler Stovall, White Freedom, which critiques not only 1776, but the entire Enlightenment so-called project. And then, of course, there's the notorious 1619 Project out of the New York Times. And of course, there's Ishmael Reed, the paramount Black intellectual of Oakland, who did this spoof of the Manuel Miranda extravaganza, Disney come Broadway extravaganza, Hamilton, where he points out the reality with regard to Hamilton marrying into a slaveholder's family. So I dare say that this mythology of 1776 is now on the ropes. Certainly, it will not survive this century, and it may not even survive this decade.
Yes, exactly. You know, what you're saying is so critical, because how I see it. Is there echo? I don't know. Maybe I can mute you. Hold on one second. Sorry, Gerald. So it's so important what you say, Dr. Horn, because settler colonialism, white supremacy, it is not being talked about in relations to this, not only this day, but I think just how we orient ourselves in this struggle, right? This struggle against the U.S. power structure, capitalism, imperialism. And what I find so troubling is that when there are expressions of Black self-determination, like what we saw in 2020, this last year, into this year with the historic protests against racist policing, what we experienced since 2014 in the death, in the vicious lynching of Michael Brown, we often are just having these debates where we even just have to introduce the idea of self-determination and settler colonialism, these terms that you're speaking of, just into the debate, and we have to start from scratch. I feel like that's where we often are starting. You wrote a great piece recently, actually, that was republished by the Monthly Review against, hold on one second. Remind me of the title of your recent piece.
Against left-wing nationalism, that one?
Yes, exactly.
Left-wing white nationalism, excuse me.
Yes, well, that's which was incredible, because, I mean, it's saying everything that I think we at Black Agenda Report are thinking all of the time when it comes to how races and white supremacy is ignored, but the present experience of Black people in this country is bearing fruit. The majority of the world is experiencing white supremacy on a global scale. And so I want you to, if you could, give us a picture of what you write a lot about, which is the role of Africans, the role of the enslaved in pushing history forward in the colonial context of the mainland colonies, because the breakaway from Britain is often just viewed as the colonists were sick of tyranny from the motherland, right? And that was it. But yet there were all of these rebellions that were happening, and you put up a very good argument that Africans en masse, the vast majority of them, the enslaved, were siding with the British, and that there were cases in Florida, in Spanish colonized Florida, where Africans were being armed and they were throttling South Carolina, for example. Could you speak to this in some detail for us? Because I think it's so important. And then how does it relate to the current historic experience of Black people in the United States?
Well, you're raising a number of points. With regard to the revolts south of the Canadian border against British rule, once again, people need to ask the question, well, why didn't Canada revolt, for example? And particularly since you obviously have this restive population in Quebec. It was restive in the 18th century, it's restive today. And you know them by their fruits, by their fruits you shall know them. And so why is it that the so-called revolutionary republic established post-1776 has a pay or die system with regard to healthcare, whereas we can only dream at this point about the single payer healthcare system that people in Canada enjoy? Shouldn't it be the other way around? I mean, shouldn't the so-called revolutionary republic have the social welfare benefits? Isn't that what revolution is all about? Bettering the lives of the masses? But of course, we know that the vaunted Constitution and Bill of Rights did not apply to the African population, nor the indigenous population. Take the vaunted Second Amendment, for example, the right to bear arms. The Second Amendment, boys and girls, did not apply to Native Americans and to Black people. Because if it did, the regime would have been overthrown. That is to say, the slave regime in particular, well before 1865, believe me. Likewise, you could even make an argument as a person who used to be a lawyer that you could make an argument that the Constitution pre-1865, in a sense, only applies in Washington, D.C., because the United States pre-1865 is like the European Union, and the federal Constitution has limited reach. And so if you look at the right to be free of illegal search and seizure, well, first of all, if you lived in a slave cabin, you had no right to keep the slave master out of the slave cabin if they wanted to barge in. I mean, hello, this should be obvious. And the fact that people either don't think about these issues or they think falsely and correctly about these issues helps to explain why we're in such a deep hole, why you had on January 6th an attempt to violently prevent the transfer of power from one bourgeois administration to another bourgeois administration, and why it is that the so-called European allies of the United States, as represented by Mr. Biden's trip to Europe just a few weeks ago, they're all hedging like crazy. I mean, they must be studying lessons from hedge fund billionaires in terms of how to hedge, because as they survey the landscape, they fully anticipate a return of the Trumpistas in November 2022, and certainly by November 2024. And if that case, then that case, of course, is Katie bar the door in terms of the further shriveling of democratic rights. And by the way, whatever democratic rights that we enjoy in North America, please do not give credit to these wig-wearing, tight pants-wearing, so-called founding fathers. That is to say that the rights we enjoy, we took over their objection. In fact, you can make an argument that some of the recent decisions of the U.S. Supreme Court, circumscribing the right to vote, for example, the recent decision on Thursday, which gutted the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and its companion decision, which is the evil twin of the Citizens United case of a decade ago, which will allow a tsunami of dark money to flood into elections without any fingerprints on it. You could make an argument that the Supreme Court, in some ways, they're, as they say, they're going back to the original understanding. You should take them seriously of the Constitution, which did not necessarily include people like myself. And the sooner that our so-called left-wing friends wake up and smell the ink on the parchment of this overrated document, the better off we'll be. Which brings me to another point, which is that every rebellion against British rule is not necessarily a step forward for humanity. Look at Rhodesia, November 1965, when the Rhodesian Front, a runaway white supremacist regime, sought to emulate apartheid South Africa by breaking away from London's rule. This is today's Zimbabwe, because London, they thought, was moving to one person, one vote, jeopardizing white supremacy. And of course, Ian Smith, the leader of the Rhodesian Front, as I said in my book on Zimbabwe, He thought he was walking in the footsteps of 1776. He said as much, in fact. And if you look at Algeria, for example, when the French settlers in the 1950s began to revolt as they thought France was about to pull the plug on the settler colonial enterprise, they even went so far as to try to assassinate Charles de Gaulle. Was that a step forward for humanity? The fact that you're trying to prevent African majority rule? So once again, I think that these theses of these people who are prattling and prating about issues that they know little or nothing about really need to be called to account. And minimally, they should ask the question, why is it that we're sitting here in North America speaking English in light of the fact, as I said, and as you already know, Spain had the first mover's advantage?
Yes, indeed. Let's move to the founding fathers. So this is part of the terrain, I feel, where a lot of those on the left, they want to protect and defend the founding fathers as these revolutionary figures. But you have done a lot of history on this. I know a bit, but I know you've done a lot more. In terms of who exactly were George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson. All of them owned slaves. All of them were slave owners. You've mentioned that George Washington was a land speculator, so the proclamation of 1763 was a very deep annoyance to him in that he wanted westward land. He wanted to expropriate more indigenous land. Could you talk about who these folks were and why it's important to understand their class character and what they represented as the so-called representatives of this quote-unquote American Revolution?
Well, if you understand their class character, you may be able to understand their class project. You may be able to understand that the United States of America, which eventuates from their successful revolt against British rule, which, by the way, would not have been successful but for French intervention on the side of the settlers, as France was seeking to settle scores with this longtime antagonist across the Channel, speaking of London. And indeed, it backfired, since France had to go into debt in order to satisfy the voracious claims of these wild spending settlers. And going into debt then caused them to try to wring more free labor out of the enslaved in the Caribbean, which leads directly to the Haitian Revolution, which is the true revolution of this era in which we're discussing. And interestingly enough, even some of the most so-called advanced of these settlers, they were not in favor of the Haitian Revolution. In fact, on my book, Confronting Black Jacobins, I start with talking about George Washington's pained reaction in September 1791 to the early news that the Africans were on the march in the Caribbean. Now, wouldn't you think that these so-called revolutionaries would welcome another revolution? It's interesting. The historians have now done what Washington et al. Didn't do. They've thrown a blanket over 1776 and the Haitian Revolution, all calling it all the age of revolution. Well, it's very curious that one set of so-called revolutionaries, speaking of those in North America, were hotly opposed to the true revolutionaries in the Caribbean. And I think this has something to do with their class character, as noted. Many of them benefited handsomely from enslavement of Africans. Thomas Jefferson in the first instance, because he, of course, has been exposed as hypocrite number one, insofar as he was not only a beneficiary of enslavement of Africans, but then had the audacity, temerity, perhaps criminal intent to impregnate one of his slaves who was apparently a teenager. He could be called a child molester, for example. And this is outrageous that people who call themselves feminists even would throw bouquets at the feet of a Thomas Jefferson. So these were a bunch of lying, murdering, enslaving hypocrites who deserve no respect. And once again, with regard to these vaunted rights that we're supposed to celebrate, number one, as I said, it didn't apply to people like me. It's like going to apartheid South Africa. And you see this panoply of rights that apply to the European minority. And you say, oh, that forms a template for the African majority. And so rather than the folks, the black majority in South Africa taking up arms, they should wait for the logic of history to exert itself, where the rights extended to the Europeans inevitably.
Yo, can you hear me?
This thing is still muted. There we go. There, now can you hear me?
I can hear you.
All right, sick. Welcome to Subversive History, a anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, anti-colonialist Twitch stream. We're your hosts. My name's Johnny. This is Pat. I feel like shit today. I'm not gonna lie. So if this is like a bumpy one, bear with us, and you know, I don't know, maybe it'll work out. What's up, Sam? Monsieur Balls. Always a pleasure. Thank you for joining us today. Today we're going to be discussing Chapter 2 of Gerald Horne, who we were just watching an interview of with Danny Haiphong. Chapter 2 entitled "Free Trade and Africans?" ? Did the Glorious Revolution unleash the slave trade? ? Well, Patrick, did it?
Yeah. That's going to be the end of our stream for today. The Glorious Revolution did, in fact, invigorate slave trade. Everyone have a good night. It was nice seeing you. I'm glad that we could provide an appropriate, detailed substantiation for the question that started off this chapter. And we'll see you guys on Sunday. Sorry, come back. Okay. So yeah. What's up, everybody? Good to see everybody in chat. What's up, Sam? What's up, Monsieur Balls? So yeah. So we are visiting. Picking up where we left off, chapter 2 of the Counter-Revolution of 1776. Just to go over a brief overview of the things that we already discussed. We went over the introduction, which is actually like a pretty solid overview of the content the entire book would cover. And now it seems like snippets of the introduction are being expounded upon in more and more detail in the preceding chapters. So the last chapter and African resistance in the Caribbean specifically, and the implications that this had on the settlers and the colonial mindset in the Americas and in the Caribbean. Basically, as these European countries had their colonial holdings in the Caribbean, this developed into a tumultuous situation where you had a growing population of, I will use the term lightly, disgruntled slaves that sought to violently take their freedom back from their colonial masters. Obviously a future example of this that went extremely poorly for the colonial masters was the Haitian slave revolution, which occurred in the late 18th century. There's more microcosmic examples of this in Barbados, in Antigua, in St. Helena, and I guess that's the ones I know off the top of my head. Hispaniola, Cuba, places like this. There was
Antigua.
Antigua, correct.
How does that song go from like the 90s? Bermuda, Bahama, baby.
That is not from the 90s. That's a Beach Boys song.
Is it really?
Yeah, dude.
I don't fucking know. I thought it was like I didn't even know it was by the Beach Boys. I thought it was something Kokomo.
I could be
or
wrong.
whatever.
Is that not? Yeah, Kokomo.
Yeah. My wife was just correcting me because I get the lyrics wrong to every song.
Hold on, I want to see when this actually came out.
Bermuda, Bahama, baby, don't you wanna?
Oh, it came out in 1988. Why did I think that this was so old?
I wasn't wrong.
Yeah, you were right. What the hell?
Somehow.
Why is there this like? I feel like there's like this like odd aura to the Beach Boys that they're like super old or something like that.
I mean, like the Beach Boys, like probably sang a song that was like similar to it. I don't know.
Oh yeah, apparently they formed in 1961.
The Beach Boys?
Yeah,
I heard
1961 to present. How is that possible?
I mean, like I'm sure that at least one of them is still alive and still touring somewhere.
The beach does you good. So today, the subversive history we're covering is the history of the Beach Boys, who are an American rock band that formed in Hawthorne, California in 1961.
Weren't they friends with Charles Manson?
Hold on, let me just.
Yeah, they were like best friends with Charles Manson, right? They like told him, "Yo, like Helter Skelter, that actually sounds like really cool."
In June 1968, Dennis befriended Charles Manson, aspiring singer-songwriter, and the relationship lasted for several months.
Yeah, see, fucking the Beach Boys are pro Helter Skelter, allegedly.
Drawing from the Beach Boys associations with Charles Manson and former California Governor Ronald Reagan, Eric Davis remarked that the Beach Boys may be the only bridge between those deranged poles. There is a wider range of political and aesthetic sentiments in their records than in any other band in their many times. Like the state of California, they expanded and contradict themselves. Well,
yeah, see, Ronald Reagan is actually pro Helter Skelter and was 1 degree away from Charles Manson. Now we know, and knowing is half the battle.
Well, y'all can keep that one in your pocket when you're at trivia night. Next time you're at a nice little family get together, maybe for Christmas, perhaps.
Yeah, you're gathered around the Christmas tree. Maintain their traditional reasons with the old world, much to the chagrin of the rapidly expanding.
Question mark? Was that a
question mark? Is that a question or is that a statement? Or is that a quote from the book? I can't tell. You've got me.
Yeah. Okay, so just kind of like I was saying, you have slave resistance fomenting in the Caribbean. This causes a significant amount of the settlers of the Caribbean islands to seek refuge or resettlement, let's call it, in the mainland colonies on the North American continent, where they felt like they were safer and more insulated from a growing population of African slaves that might seek to remove their heads from their bodies as an appropriate course of action to obtaining their own freedom. This caused a commensurate amount of white fright, let's call it. Maybe like the original white fright, but not white flight. This is like the OG white flight. This is like the OG white flight.
Yeah, okay, this is like the original white flight, and this is also like the original like Red Scare, but Gerald Horne refers to as the Black Scare. Like I think in like the preface or the introduction, which I thought was rather interesting because there's a lot of like social parallels to this. You know what I mean? And of course, like none of it is actually just purely rooted in like culturalisms or like any kind of like culture war. It's like backed up by the state, like the Royal African Company.
Well, I mean, that's the thing though, is that this chapter we're going to be discussing the departure, or at least the slow withering of these more royal monarchistic institutions in favor of a nascent class of capitalist private slave traders. So that's really the meat of this. And before we get to that, again, Caribbean resistance, resettlement, also a continued fear of indigenous and African reprisal for the atrocities that have been committed to them, creates a growing sentiment of whiteness, meaning that now that we are facing these, hordes of, indigenous and Africans that are willing to punish us for our crimes against them, we can no longer trivially be concerned with if you're Irish or Scottish or Welsh or Jewish or any of these things that separated us. We need to now consolidate into a artificially constructed whiteness, or so that we can otherize the people who are not white, such as the indigenous and such as the Africans, and so that we can continue to exploit and enslave them. So that's where this last chapter leads off, just really going into all of those things and as they progress and how they affected the mindset of the colonizers and the settlers and how that's going to continue. Now, what this chapter is mainly concerned with is this thing called the Glorious Revolution, which took place in 1688. Now, the Glorious Revolution is looked at as really like the birth of capitalism. So I'm speaking a little bit out of turn here, but I believe that from like the 1500s on is where you saw a rise of what's known as the merchant class. Whereas society was starkly divided into those who were royal and those that were not royal, those that were like the subjects of the crown. Now you had I guess you could call it a third class emerging, which was merchant classes, who were able to use this type of commerce to acquire vast wealth, and wealth that was irrespective of their royal bloodline. So they're able to bring this in and become extremely powerful. This culminates ultimately in what's known as the Glorious Revolution. This is happening in many places. This happened in like Florence in the 1500s. You saw some of this happening, and in many other places. This is something
the Medicis, right?
The Medici, exactly. I was just learning this in my art class, because the Medicis in Florence was a time when art stopped being merely a luxury of the royalty and of the church. Like art was exclusively commissioned by churches and kings, or whatever royal.
I did not know that.
And then in the 1500s, you saw the Renaissance movement, which is where you saw like more of a merchant class that was able to commission their own art. So it's like, that's where I was just learning about some of these things, kind of like these proto-capitalisms that started popping up over Europe as the merchant class prospered. So
and that's why we have apps today where you can invest in art and make money, right?
I'm just going to say yes. Industrial economies always face an internal struggle, often civil wars, where there was old feudal and agrarian old money. Correct. So this led to a civil war in England, which precipitated the Glorious Revolution. If you want to read a pretty good book about this, this is a pretty well-known book called The Origin of Capitalism, Ellen Meekson's Wood. I read this like a year or two ago, and I wish I could tell you that I retained a whole lot from it, but this really goes into like a lot of like the ideology and the philosophical underpinnings and the events that really led to the Glorious Revolution and the things that we're talking about.
Should we put on a video about the Glorious Revolution or not?
I do have a video on the Glorious Revolution. Because I will say this, is that I felt as though Gerald Horne did not really offer an adequate breakdown of what the Glorious Revolution actually is. And we're mostly concerned with this book. We're reading this book and we're reiterating it to you to the best of our ability.
Right.
But I feel like he didn't really offer, and maybe that would be one of my criticisms of this so far, is that I really kind of wish that he elucidated what the Glorious Revolution really was. He alludes to it in that this was a time period in which you saw the monarchy take a step back and the merchant class take a step forward in terms of the power structure of England and its colonial tendrils. And you will see this is, and as a result of that, you see the Royal African Trading Company, which is something we discussed earlier, but we will revisit it in one moment, take a step back to a rising class of private slave traders.
Right.
So that's very important. Keep that in mind for a second. But I do
free trade, bruv.
And that's actually something that's very interesting that I wanted to talk about. That it seems like a lot of the language that you hear purported by libertarian free trade absolutists being utilized in this exact scenario against or in favor of private slave trading, which the hypocrisy of that is not lost on me. Can you still see me?
Because at the end of the day, the argument that libertarians want is that should a person like, freely sign themselves into an agreement, right, that pretty much like is slavery, then that should be allowed without any like, ideas or concerns, about like what is coercion.
So this video is a little bit long. It's 14 minutes, which isn't so bad, but it's Crash Course, and we all love Crash Course. And I think we can pause it when it's necessary. But I just felt like it was really important that we, myself included, get like kind of like a very like basic refresher of what the Glorious Revolution is, because this is actually like a really major part of history, especially if you concern yourself with like educating yourself on like what capitalism is, where capitalism comes from, and I think this is really important. So like you can see, it does begin with a civil war, but then it ultimately culminates in the Glorious Revolution. So we'll just take
Pat, you're telling me that capitalism isn't just when there's money and markets?
No. I mean, yeah, yes, that is what I'm telling you. One thing that I was thinking about that was pretty interesting is that like we exist with like a current dichotomy between like, at least if you ask like many like probably like non-Marxist individuals or like many of the average people walking down the street, that there's like a polar debate around power structures if it should fall in the hands of like private or like state or collective enterprise. Right. And it seems like if you ask like many like liberal many liberal those with a liberal understanding of the world, or like a libertarian, or even with like a socially oriented one, that it's like the state as we've known it is like opposite, or the polar opposite of a collective owner of a private ownership.
Yeah, but you gotta end the Fed.
Yeah, but when you learn about this, the precise mechanisms of capitalism being born was private merchants wrenching state control from like royalty or from the monarchy. So it's like from the very birth of capitalism and the modern era, it was born of private control.
Right.
Like deregulating and moving away from the state is not bringing it to something unrealized or unprecedented. This was literally what had happened in the 17th century. So it's like the entire state structure that we've known from its very inception,
yeah,
is that of a private power wrenching control.
Right.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I do. And I think like Monsieur Balls brings up a point, like the wealth of the and gold of the New World saw Spain dominating Europe at this time. That was still done as like an extension of the state, of like the lords or whatever, like, monarchy of Spain at that time. It's not like, the conquistadors were going there like, as independent, contractors, whatever the hell you'd want to call them. Sorry, yeah. I'm like fried today. But like, it's not like they came back to Spain as just like independently wealthy men. Like a lot of that gold went directly to the Spanish crown. Lords revolted against the king. Yeah, like, and I think like the other interesting thing to bring it to today, like what you were talking about, Pat, is that what we see today is that the state, like, people always say like, oh, and the Fed, or that like the polar opposite is it should be a private enterprise running things versus the state. Well, all the state does today, right? And especially since like I want to say like it really ramped up during Reagan, but all we see today is the state contracting private enterprise to fulfill its responsibilities.
The state is just a formalized apparatus for private industry control of a nation.
Right. And there's such like a level of not just like, blurred lines between the state.
Whether there's a constitution or like federal or some type of a federal law, a state will always materialize, whether it's like formal or informal. If you wiped out, all type of federal law or constitutional law in the United States today, there would be a state that forms under Amazon and Walmart. Like it wouldn't be like a state that might not have laws, but regardless, there would be like ensuing power structures that would necessarily descend from the largest owners and largest, power entities that will manage resources, whether it be privately or collectively, that will inherently create these types of mechanisms. I don't see any way that cannot be. It's like this, and also, I mean, there's the classic like Sam Cedar defense that you need a state to even formalize property. Right. You can't own something without a state. You can't you can't have a deed to property without a state. You can't own a house. You can't own land. You can't. Nothing can say that I own this and you can't take it from me without there being some kind of underlying state to enforce that.
Right. And how does the state enforce that? Special, armed men or whatever the hell Lenin called them. Yeah.
We're getting way off right now. Yeah. Let's listen to our good friends over at Crash Course for like the most elementary description of this situation, so that all of us can collectively kind of be on the same page as we move forward. I love that like this is so regularly used. I've gone through like 2 college level philosophy classes. The amount of times that they actually are like, yeah, here's a crash course video for this. It's part of your like weekly weekly module to watch a crash course video. Let's visit our old friend John Green to go through a very elementary description of the Glorious Revolution and the Civil War which preceded it.
Hi, I'm John Green, and this is Crash Course European History. So, as we saw last week, absolutism was in the air during the 17th century, but not just in France. Across the English Channel, King James VI of Scotland became King James I of England after the death of the childless Elizabeth in 1603, and he found himself thinking, I might not agree with those French Catholics about everything, but they are on to something when it comes to the divine right of kings to have absolute power. The inhabitants of the British Isles, however, weren't so sure. In fact, Protestant reformers were imagining a different idea of government. That's right, my friends. The constitutions are coming.
You're muted, bro. Hey, Dorian.
So as you can see, yes, this is a, as he just said, the constitutions are coming. So, you know what I mean? We're developing a new type of like federalized law structure that will remove supreme dictatorship from monarchy.
Him and his brother are super lib once involved. But like,
oh no, it's still cool. It's like, if you're just looking for like regular, it's kind of informal and a little bit humorous, and it has like cool little animations. Like if you go through like community college or something like that, these are used so often by professors. I like them. Like if I'm just looking for like a quick refresher, just like this on a topic, I think they're pretty useful. So, not everything is going to be completely
no. It's like, look. I love Sylvia Federici and I love Caliban and the Witch as an introductory, understanding to where the patriarchy stems from and like the origins of capital. But that doesn't mean I agree with her on everything.
Who are we talking about?
What? Oh, Sylvia Federici, the woman that wrote Caliban and the Witch. Yeah, she's kind of a turf, so
All right.
What are you gonna do?
Are you good?
Yeah.
So when he inherited the British throne, James aspired to unite his holdings in Wales, England, Scotland, and Ireland into a more cohesive whole, but of course those regions, despite their geographic proximity, contain quite a lot of religious, ethnic, and economic diversity. Religiously, Calvinists, called Presbyterians in Scotland, Catholics and Anglicans had big disagreements. Also, if you've ever been to a Scottish bar and accidentally said how much you're enjoying your visit to England, you will know that Scottish people are not English. True story, by the way. The entire bar went quiet all at once. It was really uncomfortable, and then I tried to fill that silence by saying, well, you have the same money, which also didn't go over great. James thought he could solve these problems by taking the title of King of Great Britain, one place, one king. He also had his officials institute English laws across all his kingdoms and promote adherence to Anglicanism, and he sought to keep the peace among Europe's great families by marrying his son Charles to Henrietta Maria, the Catholic sister of Francis Louis XIII. But that only ended up furthering divisions because Henrietta Maria refused to convert to Anglicanism and became a target for opponents from various factions. Henrietta Maria's husband, James's son Charles, came to the throne in 1625, and he too firmly believed in the divine right of kings because, of course he did. He was backed by the nobility and about half of the gentry, or the wealthy landowners who were below the nobility, but other members of the gentry opposed the idea of absolutist monarchical power, as did many other less powerful people, including many farmers and much of the merchant classes who tended to live in cities. Those groups didn't have titles or ancient claims to land, but they were driving much of Britain's economy, and they felt that the elected English Parliament should have more power, because of course that would also mean that they had more power. In 1628, Charles bound to that parliamentary strength by agreeing to the Petition of Right, which said that the king could not raise taxes without Parliament's permission. But then he was like, I think I might have found a loophole, and he basically ghosted them. He simply stopped calling Parliament back into session, which of course infuriated Parliament, and also felt like a rather blatant absolutist move from a king who had just agreed to a check on his power. Meanwhile, Puritans, who objected to the pomp of Anglicanism with its statues and stained glass and incense, resisted the Archbishop of Canterbury named William Laud, who was attempting to bring the Puritans back to Anglican orthodoxy. Puritan critics were tortured, sometimes put into the stocks or whipped. Some had their faces mutilated, as were members of the upper classes who disapproved of the king and his administration. Then Laud stirred up defiance among the Presbyterians in Scotland, whom he also aimed to restore to Anglicanism. He pushed them to adopt a new version of the prayer book of the Anglican Church, and resistance to that was literally riotous. Young women hurled the new prayer books during religious services and provoked their congregations to join them. In fact, the Presbyterian Scots were eventually so enraged that they invaded England. In response, after more than a decade of refusing to summon Parliament, Charles was like, Parliament, can you come back, please? I need your support in declaring war. Like many a ruler, Charles I thought that warfare, which he undertook on numerous occasions, would make Parliament rally around him and allow him to raise taxes. But that was a big mistake. Instead, the representatives responded by removing Archbishop Laud from power, decreeing that Parliament must meet at least every 3 years, and putting additional roadblocks in Charles's way. When Charles called on soldiers to arrest the members of Parliament who had thwarted his demands, outright civil war erupted. Between 1642 and 1646, those loyal to the king, called Cavaliers, faced off against those loyal to Parliament, called Roundheads, because of their short haircuts. Parliamentary forces raised the New Model Army, led by Oliver Cromwell, and this new army saw opposing religious sects let go of their differences, which allowed them ultimately to capture Charles I and then execute him in 1649. We also have to remember that during these years, the Little Ice Age was taking its toll. Many people died from famine. Furthermore, between 1625 and 1636, the bubonic plague killed some 45.
Have you ever heard of something called the Little Ice Age?
Yes, actually, I have. I think it was caused by volcanic activity in the fucking Philippines or some shit. All I know is that it caused a really bad season of crops for not even just Europe, I think even in America as well.
The Little Ice Age was a period of bitter winters and mild summers that affected Europe and North America between the 14th and 19th century. Which is a casual period of 500 years, but
the casual period.
The cold weather is well documented, written in records, and supported by paleoclimatic records such as tree rings, glacial growth, and lake sediments. Okay. Also, just something new that you learned today. You can stick that in your trivia pile along with the Beach Boys being friends with Charles Manson. Now you know about the Little Ice Age too. So we have an extremely diverse history program here. So back to the regularly scheduled video.
It's all connected, man. It's the sprawl.
We're going to tie this all together. Don't worry.
100,000 people in London alone. Amid successive bad weather, entire villages disappeared as their inhabitants either died of illness or starvation, or else abandoned their communities in search of food. And all of that enhanced the resistance and criticism of those who found it impossible to pay more taxes so that Charles could realize his absolutist dreams and fight his wars. A higher percentage of Britain's population died in this period than during both World War I and World War II combined. But with the war ended and Charles defeated, England was now a republic, although not quite like contemporary republics since it was ruled by the increasingly dictatorial Oliver Cromwell. Although come to think of it, that does make it like some contemporary republics. Cromwell was still the head of the new model army, but without a shared enemy in the king, all those varying sects and religious factions went back to squabbling with each other until Cromwell wiped out those in the new model army who objected to the policies of his Puritan regime. Cromwell's army, for instance, crushed the Catholics in Ireland, whom it was suspected favored a restored monarchy, but even so, Cromwell could not keep his army or his government unified, despite building a very impressive network of spies. In 1658, after less than a decade in power, Cromwell died, and as civil war once more seemed inevitable, in 1660, Parliament summoned Charles II to the throne. Did the center of the world just open? Is there a wig in there? Am I going to have to put that on, Stan? So this was the time in English history when the wigs that I, at least, associate with English history and fancy British people started to be a thing. What purpose did they serve? Well, then as now, they were a way of concealing hair loss, but also people like to cut their hair short to minimize the risk of lice. So now I'm worried that this wig that Stan gave me has lice, and we're going to move on with the video. So Charles II was summoned by Parliament to become the English king, and you might be wondering why someone who'd seen his father executed for being King Charles I would want to become King Charles II, but humans are moths that fly toward the light of power, my friends, and Charles II thought he could be a better king. In some ways, he was. His reign began the so-called Restoration, a time of creativity and discovery, and also further tragedy. In 1665, another outbreak of plague quickly killed some 30,000 people. The next year, fire broke out in London, destroying more than 10,000 buildings, including many churches and businesses. The monument to the Great Fire of London encapsulates just how thoroughly religious disagreements shaped every facet of human life. Even when memorializing the dead, the monument's inscribers couldn't help but make it sectarian, writing, "Here, by permission of heaven, hell broke loose upon this Protestant city, the most dreadful burning of this city, begun and carried on by treachery and malice of the popish faction." Now, of course, that wasn't true. The fire started in a bakery run by an Anglican. Charles II, meanwhile, had a Catholic mother in Henrietta Maria and was seen to be gravitating toward what that monument called the popish faction. He loosened restrictions on Catholics and other dissenters, a move Parliament responded to with the Test Act of 1673, which excluded all those who weren't loyal to the Anglican Church from government positions. So just for a quick recap, James I tried to unite all of Great Britain and Ireland under one absolutist crown before dying in 1625. His son Charles I ended up being on the losing side of the English Civil War and was separated from his head in 1649, at which point Britain technically became a republic that more closely resembled a military dictatorship, which eventually failed, leading in 1660 to Charles II becoming king. Charles II had at least 12 children, but none with his wife, so his rightful heir was his brother James, a Catholic, who would eventually become king, but only for a few years. But before we get there, let's go to the thought bubble. Across these decades, people saw the social order turned upside down, as some male reformers proposed free love and women took up arms, even carrying them openly during the 1640s and 1650s. One pro-parliament woman recalled seeing the leader of the Irish rebels approaching, writing that she, quote, "sent him a shot in the head that made him bid the world good night." Other women began publishing and preaching, with Quaker women emphasizing the divine light shining from all humans, both male and female. And with the political scene fluctuating so rapidly and alliances changing, women served many roles, including as spies, even going to other countries to gather intelligence on those plotting to restore the monarchy, or when it was restored, those plotting to overthrow it again. Among these was Afra Bain, daughter of a butcher and midwife. She was pro-Stuart, the family name of James and Charles, and traveled incognito to the Netherlands in the 1660s to gather intelligence on Stuart enemies. However, Bain also picked up another career, soon becoming a popular playwright at a time when, as part of the world turning upside down, women began going to the theater and serving as actresses. Before that, men had taken women's roles in plays. In 1688, the year before she died, Bain published Orinoco, the story of a wrongly enslaved African prince and his love for a high-born slave woman. In this regard, Bain was part of a thriving Restoration literary scene, which rejected Puritan austerity in favor of wit, sexual desire, and playfulness. Thanks, Thought Bubble. So, despite the efforts of Afra Bain and her ilk, the Stuart drive for absolutism halted for good in between 1688 and 1689, when the Catholic ways of James II just became too much for the pro-Parliament advocates, and when, to compound the danger, James's second wife gave birth to a son and heir. James's older daughter Mary and her spouse William III were summoned as monarchs to replace James II, but only after they agreed to rule by a Bill of Rights. This document stated in its first article that no monarch would reject or publish a decree without the consent of Parliament. It also guaranteed some of the rights later found in the US Bill of Rights, including, for instance, the right to bear arms, at least as long as you were Protestant. And it's important to note that political theory underpinned this political transformation, which came to be called the Glorious Revolution. And this is the part in European history where we usually talk about Thomas Hobbes and John Locke. Thomas Hobbes took a very pessimistic view of human nature and argued for an absolutist form of political organization in his book Leviathan. It argued that a lack of political regulation created lives that were, quote, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. In Hobbes's worldview, with absolute rule, one surrendered any claim to personal liberty, but received in exchange a measure of personal well-being and protection from that absolutist government. But there was another famous English theorist of government and human society, John Locke, who presented a much rosier view of humanity in his two treatises of government. Locke argued that in a natural world, individuals were born free and equal, but that they rationally banded together to create a government that would uphold laws and protect their rights. So Locke is seen as articulating a theory of government similar to the one put forth by the Glorious Revolution, and also similar to the one outlined in the preamble to the US Constitution. And in many ways, Locke's political thought is the foundation of traditional or classical liberalism, that is, the belief in rights and freedom as intrinsic to the human self. And we see this theory amplified from Locke's time down to the present day. Like today, many of us take it for granted that humans have certain natural rights, including the rights to life, liberty, and property, language taken directly from two treatises. But human rights are an invented concept, albeit a very useful one. King Henry VIII, for instance, did not agree with the notion that those who claimed to own land actually owned it, as evidenced by his extensive reclamation of Catholic land for himself. The creation of concepts of human rights reminds us again that how we imagine the world, and indeed how we imagine ourselves and each other, deeply impacts the world in which we end up living. Whether we believe in human rights and how we act on that belief has profound consequences today, just as it did during the Glorious Revolution. Next week, we're going to cross back to the...
I cannot wait until we read Liberalism by Domenico Lacerda.
Yeah, because as they essentially stated in that video, is that John Locke is like the king lib in terms of that, and actually they go over Locke pretty extensively in here, and how the Lockean philosophy of property rights and the way that influenced liberal capitalism as we understand it today, and also there's Locke's theory of property. It's like almost like a theory of labor, and if you inflict labor onto a piece of property, you can pretty much take it, which was used as a justification for many of the displacements of indigenous peoples in the expanding United States. So
Yeah.
if you want more on that topic from a Marxist perspective, this book is definitely going to be good. That's some of the things that I do remember from when I read this.
Yeah, and we even discussed it during one of the chapters when we were going over
The divide.
The divide,
They talked
yeah.
about it in the divide also. So yeah, definitely Locke and that Lockean perspective of property is like a hugely indispensable part of liberal capitalist philosophy. Were you going to read this or anything, or did you have anything, or do you want me to keep going?
Nah, keep going.
So now we've kind of like established, maybe in a little bit of a long-winded way, what the Glorious Revolution is and what implication that had, at least onto Britain, but also obviously this would extend to the British colonies in North America. So in this Glorious Revolution, you see the absolutists or the monarchists taking a back seat, or at least a significant step back, to a growing British Parliament, which is enshrining more of these kind of ideas of like human rights and human rights and things like that.
Yes, I
What
did.
is it?
Oh, Ben Norton just came out with another video where he is talking about a new thing that Jason Hickel put out, where
Okay.
it like definitively says that England is responsible for what, like 1 million deaths in India, or 100 million, something like that.
I was about to say 1 million would be serious. More died just under Churchill.
Then it's definitely 100 million.
So I would say that it's vastly, vastly more, because we even covered here the that sounds way. This sounds like the right estimate, because maybe 165. Who knows? Million.
Yeah, sorry, I'm super fried right now.
No, you're good. Dude, I don't know if you remember, but I had like a complete brain shutdown last night. I lasted like an hour and a half, and then it's like somebody just turned the key off, and I was yawning. I wasn't remembering anything, but yeah. So just on this stream, we covered some of the topics that were in Mike Davis's colonial atrocities and the making of the Third World, El Nino, Third World Holocausts. That's what it's called. Where he talks about specifically as the British Empire wrenched India away from the subsistence crops that they had lived on for generations and forced them into this way of like cash crop, for exportation type of agriculture. When these droughts hit, the Indian subcontinent was historically insulated from the effects of these ecological issues, because they were so in tune with how to use their their land for their own benefit and to create grain stocks and things like that. So then when England came in and we're starting like, guess what? Now you're growing cotton. Now you're growing tea. Now you're doing all this stuff, and now you're growing opium. This is the things that they were doing, so that when these droughts hit, it was disastrous. Millions and millions and millions of people died in several separate issues, I believe, from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. And then you have this even more egregiously happen during the era of World War II, in an era of complete industrialization for most of the world, or at least should I say from the first world and the majority of the second world. I mean, this is a very industrialized time, where they're just taking tons and tons and tons of, I would say, millions of tons of grain to support the war effort, to go into reserves for allies.
Even before the war effort,
just for the reserves. And millions of people starved in the Bengal famine. And Churchill had an extremely outspoken and callous view to the loss of life, blaming the Indian people, saying that they breed like rabbits and it's their fault for breeding, just kind of dehumanizing them and making them out to be these animals that can't stop breeding.
I believe he referred to us as a beastly people with a beastly god.
Exactly. Yeah. So, rotten piss, Winston Churchill.
Yes.
He's still exalted as such a fucking amazing guy. He's quoted so often in so many things. It's frankly disgusting.
You'll even hear Anglo Indians living in England, refer to him as
oh yeah,
the man we needed at the era. went kind of Australian, whatever. I don't
Well,
fucking know.
we had people, we've had people come in this stream to claim they were from India and have an
Yeah.
extremely, favorable view of British colonialism and it had on
That's-
India. I'm sure that they would have
That's the colonizer inside your head, man.
So, just to bring us back from that video and to what we're talking about here, to quote the book.
Is it the part where he says, in the context of a Protestant victory over Catholics in London, both epochal trends made it easier to rely more on enslaved Africans and less often cruel exploitation of Irish and Scottish servants.
That does come up, but so the glorious revolution of 1688 was not so glorious for Africa and Africans.
Yeah.
The year of 1688 was also a setback for Catholic rule in London, though the Bill of Rights that emerged makes understandable why this conflict has been seen widely as a step forward generally for Europeans. As for Africans, there is little need to hedge about its deadliness. Though the blow absorbed by Catholics suggested that London would have to rely more heavily on armed Africans, the compelled retreat of monarchy, compelled by this new parliament, and the strengthening rise of the merchants, already buoyed by the wealth generated in slave labor encampments in the Caribbean and North America. So you have these people that are becoming much richer that are obviously on the side of this, anti-monarchy, parliamentary style of governance so that they can continue to ascend without the interference of the monarchy. Led to the weakening of the monopoly of the Royal African Company, backed by the Crown and chartered in the earlier iteration in 1660. So if you recall, we brought this up earlier in the book, and I'll bring it up again. And again, I apologize for the logo. But we have the Royal African Company, which was an English mercantile trading company set up in 1660 by the Royal Stuart family and City of London merchants to trade along with west coast of Africa. So we have this. This is much like the East India Company in the sense that it's a, I guess you could call it state in a very informal sense, like not the state as it existed today, but in the state of the monarchy, the royal state had this company for enforcing the slave trade or the sale of slaves. And then you can see down here that the Royal African Company was dissolved by the African Company in 1750, with its assets being transferred to the African Company of Merchants, which means private slave traders. These principally consisted of 9 trading posts, blah, blah, blah. So later activities and insolvency. So from 1694 to 1700, which is, just within a few years after the Glorious Revolution, the company was a major participant in the Comenda Wars, the port city of Comenda. The company allied with a merchant prince named, this is just for stuff that happened in there. In 1689, the company acknowledged it had lost its monopoly with the end of royal power in the Glorious Revolution, and it ceased issuing letters of marque. Edward Colston transferred a large segment of his original shareholding to William III at the beginning of 1689, securing the new regime's favor. To maintain the company and its infrastructure and end its monopoly, Parliament passed Trade with Africa Act in 1697. Among the provisions, the act opened the African trade to all English merchants who paid a 10% levy to the company on all goods exported from Africa. So essentially, the Trade with Africa Act of 1697, also known as an act to settle the trade with Africa, was a law passed by Parliament of England, the Parliament that we just discussed that now has growing power to regulate the monarchy, to officially revoke the monopoly enjoyed by the Royal African Company in the African slave trade. What this means is not like an abolitionist effort. This is just an effort to allow the growing, wealthy, and powerful private slave traders to engage in privatized slave trading. So this is a monumental trend in this glorious revolution and the ensuing social and economic developments of not only England, but other European powers as well as the colony. So, do you have anything, Johnny, or do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, no, I got kind of distracted because it's your balls to talk about Ernest Bevin. I've never heard of him.
You know about the Ernest Bevin, World War II, had a coalition government. Bevin organized with the unions to restructure British war production. Church will make the try to meddle through.
Although it says here in his Wikipedia that Bevin remained a determined anti-communist and critic of the Soviet Union in 1946 during a conference. The Soviet minister Molotov, not the famous one, I think. Is it? No, yeah. Molotov repeatedly attacked British proposals while defending Soviet policies, and in total frustration, Bevan stood and lurched towards the minister while shouting, "I've had enough of this, I have," before being restrained by security. Strongly encouraged the United States to take a vigorously anti-communist foreign policy in the early years of the Cold War. He was a leading advocate for British combat operations in the Korean War. Yeah, though, I'm sorry, Monsieur Balls. This dude sounds like a total fucking piece of shit.
He supported the Korean War.
Yeah, he's like, you should absolutely invade Korea.
Okay, so let's get back on track here. So now we see that because of what was the initial question of this chapter, Johnny?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
What was the initial question which began this chapter? The question that you posed to me in the beginning.
Free trade in Africans?
Well, I think you asked me, was the Glorious Revolution...
Did the Glorious Revolution unleash the slave trade? Question mark.
So now we see that I actually have a couple other cool things here. Now we see that the Glorious Revolution not only had a hindrance of the monarchy and was the birth of this kind of like Lockean idea of government and rights and everything like that, but this essentially allowed a unfettered private industry of slave traders to explode, which was done somewhat inefficiently, or at least restrained by the Royal African Company. Excuse me. So to continue, this weakening of the Royal African Company meant the entrance into the frenziedly lucrative business of slave trading by separate or private traders, that is, freelance merchants, ugly traffickers in humans. In rudely choreographed pas de deux, I'm sorry, I'm not.
Pas de deux. It is a dance or figure for two performers, or an intricate relationship or activity involving two parties or things.
I think your French accent really devolved into like a
fucking, I don't know, man. I'm
like
dying.
I don't know what happened there. Okay. So as the monarchy took a step back in control of the slave trade, the merchants took a step forward. This deregulation of the trade in human flesh fomented a kind of free trade in Africans. This aided immeasurably in providing the forced labor needed to develop the mainland, which in turn brought this local elite into increasing conflict with London, particularly when it sought to trade with neighbors who happened to be foes of the crown, for example, the French and Hispaniola. So now you see you have private slave traders, many of which in the colonies, such as Rhode Island, such as in Charleston, South Carolina, such as in Virginia, and they have less scruples with is scruples the right word there? They have less issues with doing trade with the French or anything like that. They're separated by an entire ocean from London. They're, developing their own society, still under nominal control from Britain, but also like gaining greater and greater autonomy and independence. So they're going to trade with France and Hispaniola because that is economically viable for them. These are private institutions that are now being, that are working for their own profit incentives.
Right.
So they're going to be less and less concerned with, the beef that London may have with France, because for their own economic advantage, they're going to trade with France. So now we see a growing schism because of this privatization of the slave trade between mainland London royalty and, I guess other, state apparatus of London and colonies, which are now growing irrespectively.
But at the end of the day, right, like the indigenous people are still losing.
Oh,
right.
Well, of course. Right now we're talking about inter like European conflict right now. Like obviously, no matter what, this is happening at the expense of Africa. We're talking about the trading of slaves here. So this is obviously all happening at the expense of non-white people, whether it's slaves or
which is, kind of what I was trying to get at
in any of this specified discussion.
Right, which is like what I was trying to get at, because to try and relate this back to what Monsieur Balls and Chad is talking about, like, this guy that was like a great like union leader. It's like, I'm sure he was like a great union labor leader and all that jazz, and like, in merry old England. But like at the end of the day, was like at the cost of like, you know, zero international, zero like, you know, I
Well, and also you can find many a union-minded individual in the United States
Right.
that had absolutely abhorrent racist views and that actively commissioned to keep black people out of
Right.
unions. You know what I mean? Like unions are great. We support unions. But you know, you can read Settlers and there's, you know, volumes of history of, you know, unions either while they're being misguided and with divided racial politics, or that they actually held these kind of like xenophobic ideas that once the black man can join their ranks, that their wages are going to suffer, that they, you know, express these extremely racist ideas. So I mean, like, you know, we need to look at, you know, both sides of all these issues, that like, you know, you can still be like a union, you know, a ardent supporter of union and spreader of the union ideology or the union system, but also, you know, potentially have some extremely disgusting
Right. I don't know. This dude, I'm like kind of looking at it and like he's like all over the place because he also offered recognition of the People's Republic of China. So it's just like I have no idea what to think of this guy.
So did Nixon.
Yeah, true. Okay, so then yeah, like, well, we all know
Nixon was the first, you know, the first guy was the first guy to go over there and be like, yeah, China, this is great. You know, it's a fucking buy-off for the center economy workers. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm trying not to get too.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Balls. Like, I want to, but like, you know, we also want to, you know, make sure that we cover like what we are trying to get here, which is.
So this paragraph ends with the strain between that I was describing earlier between the colonies and London, eventually burst the garment of colonial rule, leading to 1776. Yet this increase in the slave trade also delivered deadly perils in the form of enraged Africans who could reverse the theretofore delightful fortunes of colonizers and murder them all, or, as mainland settlers came to fear, ally with another European power, then murder them all.
Yeah, so, then murder all the Europeans.
A couple things I had here that I also wanted to bring up that are kind of cool. Let me put like a... I know where to respond.
I wonder if like any
but like here's a cool little piece of evidence that I found searching stuff. This is actually, you can actually buy this right now if you felt like it. But
what the fuck is it?
This is a Royal African Company of England, characterized in 1672. So just before, the Royal African Company engaged primarily in the slave trade, over which it held the English monopoly until 1698, 10 years after the Glorious Revolution, and trafficked to a lesser extent in gold and ivory. The issues addressed in the documents reflect the company's struggle to remain viable in the years leading up to the dissolution in 1752. So this is like, I guess, issues that are like, this is like a document of the Royal African Company that talk about like how they're like fading into insignificance because of the rise of private slave traders.
Quick chat, subscribe so that we can afford a 384. Please subscribe so we can buy it.
There's like a historic recognition of an L taken by a Royal Trading Company, like, so that's pretty cool.
Wow.
If anybody wanted it, but just searching from stuff, I came across this and it was kind of cool just to see like a formalized, like, you know, recognition that like we are struggling to remain viable because of like the years following the
Get wrecked.
But unfortunately, the lack of viability for this Royal Trading Company was just supplanted by a booming viability and a robust growth in private slave trading.
Of like just the most demonic forces imaginable.
Right, exactly. So now just moving forward into Le Book. So through the acceleration of the slave trade, propelled by the productive forces of nascent capitalism, free trade in the most unfree of commerce. So this is like the contradiction between like free trade, but what you're trading in is the commodity of enslaved people. in the most unfree of commerce was a cataclysm for Africa and Africans, as kidnapping of free Negroes, the degrading of their status generally, and the like became more common, notably after the monopoly that we just discussed was eroded in the 1690s. Accounts of shipboard insurrections also became more common in colonial and English newspapers, which did raise doubts about the entire American enterprise, adding to the momentum of abolitionism that culminated in June 1772, which in turn unsettled the mainland, contributing to the unilateral Declaration of Independence. So,
And the momentum of abolition that culminated in June 1772. He's talking about Somerset versus Stuart.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So now he is creating the trail of breadcrumbs that lead us from slavery, the issues, the contradictions that arise from slavery. Like much like we can look at like the contradiction of capitalism, this dynamic is wrought with contradictions, such as, you know what I mean, this increasing instability of enslaving hundreds of thousands of Africans that, you know, are going to naturally want to resist their captivity, versus the ravenous seeking of development and, you know, expansion and profit, which only requires the importation of more slaves. Yeah, this contradiction is just growing, and it's creating different sentiments, obviously in London itself, in the Caribbean, in the colonies, and even within the colonial structure itself. Because now you have private individuals that are engaging in this. You don't have any kind of like overarching collective structure that is like working for any kind of like overall benefit, even if it is of an absolutely detestable industry. You just have like, you know, you might have London or someone in the Caribbean or even someone in Charlestown being like, hey, these Africans are, you know, going to you know, was going to like cause a insurrection. But then again, you have a guy down the street who's down the street who's like, I don't care. I'm trying to sell as many Africans as I possibly can. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not worried about that. I'm enriching myself. You can see a lot of this, draw comparisons of how capitalism exists today, whether it be in like something like, you know, global warming or something like that. You know, the way in which, you know, this unscrupulous desire for profit clouds like any type of other suggestion or logic.
Right. I mean, like that. Well, I mean, like that's the other thing, is that no one getting what they want is even actually going to solve the issues that like they're trying to either solve or prevent, because like the colonists want more slaves, right? But having more slaves means you also need more white people, right? And the only white people that they can get to move to the mainland, right,
are those that are oppressed.
Yeah, are those that are oppressed and already hating on like the crown, right? But along with that, like, you know, they're not really doing that much better than they were under the crown, because they're going over there as servants, right? And they're like having like low income jobs like they were having in the cities of England.
But much like future issues with these, like, or even today, they are able to hang their hat on, at least I don't have it as bad as the Africans.
Right.
Like, I still get to hold on to this, like,
right.
the breadcrumbs that I receive from the tables of capitalists or of slave traders or whatever, because I am not at the absolute lowest tier of this caste society. So like when you bring over these Irish and Italian and everything like that, even though you live in what are effectively ghettos, you know, I mean, like, you know, stuff that, you know, from the turn of the century, robber baron era and stuff like that, you can live in these hovels that are disgusting and dirty and, you know, unelectric and whatever, all these things. You're illiterate. At least that you don't live as bad as the black people who live in the ghettos down the street. So like you solidify your position in the very, very dregs of society because there is another outgroup that is even lower than you.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the thing, is that like this is just like a revolving door of outgroups. And like on top of that, like, you know, the one in the main line is reliant on like the majority of the population being that outgroup.
Yeah.
Otherwise, what's the point? Like you need to have more, like, you know, of a workforce, just like any other part of capitalism. You need to have more people that are subject to, right, the forces of capital and the nature of capitalism. Then there are those that are benefiting from capital. And yes, Sam, that whiteness is an ever-changing concept, because whiteness is like the only social construct, the only like social concept, right, that is only based on what you are not. Like that's the one thing that like we've noticed about like this concept from its, you know, origination, is that like it started off as like, you know, English Protestant wealthy, right? And then they keep kind of expanding that term to also mean like, well, so long as you're Protestant and, you know, at least English, Scotch, maybe Irish, and, you know, I guess Welsh too, right? And then they're just continuously kind of expanding that away from like this white, wealthy, Protestant English into all these other different things. So it really is just like what you are not. It's more about like what it is excluding rather than what it actually is including, because there's not a whole lot that like, you know, the Scots or the Irish or the Welsh that the English actually like have in common beyond just like, you know, an island of origin.
Yeah, and I mean, and this is like, you know, I always talk about this. I'm trying to find it here because like there was multiple times that Mexican people were removed and added from the white category in the United States Census. So like that just absolutely proves like the inconsistent, nebulous, and ever changing for whatever political agenda that it can be, that you can just be like, oh,
well, I mean, like, it's
you're
like,
white
even if
today, or you're not white now, it's not convenient for you to be white at this point. Oh, we need,
it's like, even if you are South American, let's say, right? Like, are you going to say that someone like, what the fuck's her name? Like Brianna Greyjoy, that like Argentinian actor, right? And like, you know, somebody, you know, like that's like, you know, Afro Latin from like, you know, fucking like Colombia or Brazil, right? Are they going to be looked at the same by everyone, even in South America? But then as soon as like they arrive here in North America, right, there's still an other of whiteness, well, except for like, you know, the Argentinian actor, because like, Jesus Christ, Argentina is like, you know, like the whitest South American country you can get. But like, you know, here, right, there's still not going to be totally white. She's still going to be considered like Latin, you know?
Yeah. Well, and they are like, you know what I mean? Like they are of a Latin ethnicity, but that doesn't make them non-white. You know what I mean? And this is something that I feel like a lot of people don't like understand, is like, you can have like the whole of South America and Central America is a settler colonial.
Yes.
Much like the United States is, except
Mexico too. Mexico's another one. It's not like ethnic monolith.
To varying degrees throughout all of Central and South America, there has been a more successful eradication of the indigenous population. You know, in a place like Guatemala or Peru or Bolivia, you have a much more, and I'm sure there's other, I'm just talking off the top of my head, there's a much more significant contingent of the indigenous population that still exists today. Whereas other places like Argentina were much more successful in eradicating that and just importing much more European-blooded individuals there. But you can look at Brazil, for example, and then there's also the slave trade, which was huge in places like Brazil and Cuba, which is why you have Afro-Cubans, Afro-Brazilians that are as black as any person from Africa in terms of like, you know, their physical look, but they're not, but they're considered a Latin person. Well, take Anderson Silva, for example.
Yeah, Rick on Decolonized Buffalo talks about like indigenismo like all the time, that like it was a project to make sure that like everyone like, you know, is a little bit indigenous in Mexico. Therefore, we don't have to acknowledge any issues regarding indigenous people, you know? So like that's like another route of going about it, where instead of othering them, you just like universally, like everyone is, you know, everyone like is, you know, a little bit. So we don't have to worry about it.
And it's important to point out that these white supremacist power structures exist throughout South America and Latin America, Latin America as a whole. Like, I don't think a lot of just very Western minded individuals really understand that. Like, for example, like I've heard of like white supremacist black metal bands from like Chile
Yes.
and stuff like that. And I've heard people say like, how can you be from Chile and be white supremacist? Like you can't be a Nazi and be Chilean, or be a Nazi and be Mexican. And it's like, actually you can. If you look at it, there is a massive, if you look through the political power structure of almost all of Latin America, you see white people, white fair-skinned people at the top. The only exceptions to this were like Chavez and Evo Morales, like these, and obviously the Peruvian situation that obviously I don't know enough about this.
I believe Castillo was
indigenous, I believe. But these are like massive breaks. There's a reason why. Maybe if you go to, and this is, I'm making generalizations here, but there's a reason why that when you go to a university and you meet somebody that's from Mexico or from Chile and they're extremely fair skinned, they might have the same skin complexion as me. And then when you see like migrant workers, they ethnically look very different. And it's because these same structures that separate, that operate in a white supremacist fashion exist in all these Latin American countries also.
Yes. And Sam makes, and
I hope I didn't stress you. I don't know if that rant.
No. They're agreeing with you. They're like, oh Jesus. But Sam made a very excellent point that that also makes it more confusing to explain how someone from Latin America can be not for the best interest for everyone in their own country. There are classes of individuals there too, and the dominating class considers themselves to be white. Meanwhile, if they come here to the States, they're just another Mexican.
Precisely. And this is also a big example. This is Venezuela, where you have a white passing, English speaking, wealthy upper class that exists in Caracas, who
with German last names,
who disseminate a lot of the propaganda that you're going to see that are anti-Chavismo.
Right.
But then you have rural areas full of more indigenous individuals that are very much in support of Chavismo and the Bolivarian government that never get a voice in the United States. Johnny, can you just take this for 1 second? I'm going to go grab something real quick.
Because I was actually going to bring up how it's also interesting how a lot of the people that are in the opposition to Maduro's party, right, more often than not, are these very powerful business interests, right, and how they functionally kind of kneecap their own industry and create a black market, right? Because if you create more dysfunction within your economy, right, you make the government look bad. And people in the West especially have this idea that Venezuela's economy is totally nationalized when it's not. 60% of it is private. That means 60% of that economy is owned by these very white passing, very wealthy.
That goes to the media.
Members
also.
of the what?
That goes to the media also.
Yeah, and the media as well. So you create
when you talk about the enterprises of Venezuela, right?
Yeah. How Venezuela, right? It is these very white passing or just I guess basically in Venezuela they are white, right?
People that don't look like this.
Yes, people that don't look like that, right? But then it gets
that are quoted in the Miami Herald.
Right. And then people blame, right, the government, right, for these issues surrounding the Venezuelan economy, right? Because they have this idea that the Venezuelan government controls the entire economy. But in reality, it's just these very powerful business interests kneecapping their own industry or creating a black market where they can actually get more of a profit. How else can they stay wealthy, right? But at the same time crippling the Venezuelan state.
So check this out. Here's a cool book I have. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I have not read this one yet. I've been dying to. I have so much I'm doing. I'm in the middle of my finals week at school. I'm reading this book for this. I want to read this book so bad. Maybe we'll do it on stream. Who knows? But this is called Venezuela, The Present as Struggle, Voices from the Bolivarian Revolution. The summary is Venezuela has been the stuff of front page news extravaganzas, especially since the death of Hugo Chavez. With predictable bias, mainstream media focuses on violent clashes between opposition and government. What is less known, however, is the story of what the Venezuelan people, especially the Chavista masses, do and think in these times of social emergency. Venezuela, the president's struggle seeks to open a window on grassroots Chavismo in the wake of Chavez's death. Feminist and housing activists, communards, organic intellectuals, and campesinos from around the country speak up in their own voices, defending the socialist project and pointing to what they see as revolutionary solutions to Venezuela's current crisis. If the Venezuelan government has shown an impressive capacity to resist imperialism, it is the Chavista grassroots movement, as this book shows, that actually defends socialism as the only coherent project of national liberation.
Do you want to check out this link that
yeah,
Sam...
why not? Is it short? Sam, is it short?
Here, hang on. I'm sending it to you right now.
All right.
Scoodle-doo.
But yeah, we're off topic, but I love talking about this shit.
Yeah,
so
we are incredibly... We're not even like past the first page.
But dude, I mean, but this is peripherally relevant because this is where we're watching this birth of whiteness and how we're just getting into the layers and layers of like how like nonsensical that entire concept really is. And I think that that's still valuable.
It's 1 minute and 21 seconds long.
Oh yeah, we can definitely watch this. And being in Guatemala for like 2 months really opened my eyes to this as well, especially when I stayed in Quetzaltenango, whereas it's known in Xela, which is a majority indigenous entire city, second largest city in Guatemala. And I actually got to speak with many indigenous rights activists and multipolarity supporters.
Nos apoyan nosotros estamos apoyando a un presidente elegido por el pueblo peruano, más no como usted dice de que ha sido tal por cual como usted lo está mencionando, o sea que usted lo está calumniando al señor.
A ver,
usted
señora,
lo está calumniando a nuestro presidente.
Me encanta tener la oportunidad de poder conversar.
Mire, le voy a decir, toda la vida a nosotros nos ha discriminado esos extranjeros que nos gobernaron toda la vida, pero hoy por hoy, ¿qué le duele? ¿Qué le duele de que nos gobierne un profesor?
Por eso estamos hablando, señora. Por eso yo misma, señora, de acuerdo, tiene que mantener la calma.
Humildes como nosotros los agricultores.
Y yo entiendo el pedido de quienes más sufren en este país y de pronto usted está dentro de ese grupo, señora. Lo lamento, no puedo hacer nada. No puedo hacer nada para que usted tenga.
A ver, la derecha.
Señora.
Son esos congresistas.
Señora,
sí, son esos congresistas.
Jacqueline.
Look at the news person trying to get us not
a un dictador.
¿Cuánto te pagan para que tú apoyes a la
derecha? No importa cuánto me paguen. Ese es un tema mío.
Not even denying it. It doesn't matter how much they pay me. It's like
how much they pay me.
It's like, oh, I'm sorry, miss, you look like a fucking Fox News, commentator. Like, no, it does matter.
Thank you for that video. That was awesome. I was very happy to see that. And there's so much, this whole Castillo situation is presenting itself. I am like terrible with Peruvian history is not something that I know much about whatsoever. So that's definitely something that I need to brush up on. I visited Peru, but I was like not politically minded while I was there. I was just a tourist. But that video, there was something in it that I felt like I wanted to say, but that perfectly illustrates. Oh yeah, what I wanted to say is, so when I was in Guatemala, and this is like I think a real issue with Latin America, is that when you walk around, and I think this happened in India also. Now that I'm thinking about it, is that when you walk down the street and you're walking by all the advertisements are white people. They never have anyone that looks like non-white as like the billboards or anything like that. Like it's incredibly weird. The only place that I visited where they didn't do that was Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is the only place that I was at where they had Saudi Arabian people in all the advertisements. And when you drove around in cars, no one listened to American music. In India, in Guatemala, in places like this, like it's very common just to hear people listening to like American music and things like that. No, not a single person that I met, not a single car that I was in, they were all listening to like Arabic music.
Yeah.
Sorry, you there? We good?
No, I'm here. Yeah. No, sorry. I was just following Seb Dev.
Yeah, I wish I actually used Twitch other than talking on it.
Maybe when you have more time, I'll show you the ropes and show you who to follow.
All right. So,
All right.
moving on with our discussion of the counter-revolution of 1776, this is something that I wanted to bring up. So, when 1688, the Glorious Revolution, eroded the RAC, Royal African Company, monopoly in the context of a Protestant victory over Catholics in London, both epochal trends made it easier to rely more on enslaved Africans and less often on the cruel exploitation of Irish and Scottish servants.
Right.
Besides, after 1688, London theorists were more inclined to see the poor as necessary resource for ensuring the prosperity of the metropolis itself, notably as a reservoir of labor should not be squandered in colonial projects. So essentially they're saying we'll rely more heavily on Africans for this, these enslaved, colonial expansion projects, and we'll utilize these Scots and Irishmen to be like wage laborers for this like burgeoning industrial society that we're developing. Because again, the Glorious Revolution is one of the benchmark or the beginning point of like capitalism and the industrial revolution that is coming. So now they need more and more wage laborers.
So
go ahead.
It's kind of like the evolution of like it's like a debatable term, but like aristocracy of labor. Have you ever heard of that one?
Yeah.
Where like, fucking it's creating like there are certain job sectors reserved for like, the Anglos, right? And others for like, the colonial subjects.
Well, that's kind of just what we were talking about with like, you know what I mean? Like you can convince someone to have like the most, one of the lowest and most insignificant rungs of society and happily maintain it because you can give them this alternative being like, at least I'm not at the very lowest.
At least I'm not the bottom rung.
Exactly. So I actually found a Marx quote about the English Revolution that I felt like was pretty interesting, and it kind of refers to that situation right there with the need for Scottish and Irish wage laborers. So Marx said that the English class of great landowners allied with the bourgeois, which incidentally had already developed under Henry VIII, did not find itself in opposition, as did the French feudal landowners in 1789, but rather in complete harmony with the vital requirements of the bourgeoisie. So in this article, Marx is actually comparing the French Revolution and the English Revolution, both of which were bourgeois in nature. I'm not an expert on the French Revolution by any means, but the way I understand is that the French Revolution was like a bourgeois revolution, as that like brought power away from the monarchists, correct?
Yeah. They beheaded them. So yeah.
No, but it wasn't like socialistic. It was a private. It was like
it was like an early development of socialism, and I'm not exactly the most well-read, like pretty much like what I know is through like, the Age of Napoleon podcast from like 5 years ago. But like, their tragic mistake, like Marx says, is that like they did not take control of the banks. They did not take control of like, the capital, right? They only like took control of like, a city. Right. It's not like, outside of the very well populated city that like, anything going on like, in the very rural parts of France, the entire country. You know what I mean?
Okay. So Marx continues. In fact, their lands were not feudal, but bourgeois property. On the one hand, they were able to provide the industrial bourgeois with the manpower necessary for manufacturing. And on the other, they were able to develop agriculture to the standards consonant with industry and commerce. Thus, their common interest was with the bourgeois, thus their alliance with it. So this just kind of talks about like the bourgeois nature and the requirements of the manpower necessary for manufacturing for the industrial bourgeoisie.
Right.
Just a little Marx. Maybe we don't quote Marx enough here.
No, we definitely don't. But we try to like sprinkle it in because like, we're still a new stream, and we don't want to like just come out of the gate, like Marx and Engels hammer and sickle swinging around, like, you got to get in here and you got to like, you got to listen, right?
Right. Well, I just thought it was interesting that Marx had that perspective, and Gerald Horne is like positing the same type of like concept there.
He's definitely a comrade. You
for
can't
sure.
tell him he ain't.
For sure. But I just wanted to, since it wasn't specifically brought up by Gerald Horne, I just thought it was interesting, and in my research, I found that statement by Marx that was following the same concept. So, the auspicious moment for Africa and Africans arrived when Parliament mandated that on the 24th of June, 1698, and continuing in force until at least 1712, the trade of Africans would be open to quote unquote all His Majesty's subjects, which means that this is anybody can engage in this. This is no longer something that is just for the Royal Africa Company. Anyone now, all of His Majesty's subjects may now engage in the slave trade. The latter being about 60 years to the day before the arrival of Somerset's case. But yeah, so this augured the further influx of private or separate traders into this unscrupulous business. Are we doing dialects?
Just a couple of dialectical bros.
So now we see this situation playing out where it is made into law that anyone can engage in this.
Yeah, all the.
What?
No, go on. I was gonna make a joke.
Oh, okay. Which these are quote unquote referred to as reforms of slavery, which is kind of like laughable in the sense that it didn't necessarily reform anything; it just expanded it. But
we're reforming genocide, all right?
Yeah. The reforms of the slave trade following the mid-1698 marked a great leap in the number of Africans enslaved, which contributed mightily to the development of the colonial economy, while it was a world historic defeat for Africa and Africans. The battle between private or separate traders on the one hand and the Royal Africa Company on the other was a stretch throughout the next decades following 1698, but the trend line was clearly on the ascending merchants would prevail. Jamaica and the Chesapeake colonies were prime beneficiaries when the RAC monopoly eroded, which was appropriate since merchants and planters there had been persistent and energetic opponents of RAC. Thus, in 1690, Africans and their progeny were 7% of the population on the mainland. But, emphasizes historian Robert Einhorn, from 1750 to 1780, they were 40% of the population. So, just to go back to the initial question, did the Glorious Revolution what was it? Create slavery, or just from the evidence that we have from 1690, which is 2 years after the Glorious Revolution, you can see a from 7% to 40% increase in slave population in Jamaica. Or no, that's on the mainland. I'm sorry, that's in the whole of the mainland.
That's on the mainland, and the next sentence is even crazier because in South Carolina, says this scholar, quote, from 1720 through the Revolution, slaves were over 60% of the population.
Yep. So as we can see here, and then again, this in terms of dialectics, this importation of slaves had a commensurate reaction by the populations to consolidate in this colonial mentality of whiteness. So this is something that just continued. This is an ongoing theme of this book. The warm embrace of whiteness. And these migrants were enticed by heady dreams of prosperity driven by a slave society and a complement of rights doled out via apartheid.
Which is funny how he doesn't use that word that often. And it's funny how, not that often we still live in basically an apartheid. You know what I mean? Statistically speaking, right, the people that suffer the greatest at the hands of the carceral state, whatever the hell you want to call it, Mickey Mike or whatever, right? The fact remains that more people of color are, or black people are incarcerated more than white people. Right? How is that not evidence of apartheid?
Yeah, you only really hear that from you have to dig into some real leftist critique of the United States to really hear it referred to as an apartheid state.
Right.
It's to pretend man, South Africa, that was so bad. That was an apartheid state. I'm glad we don't live in something like that.
I'm glad apartheid is over, and it's just like, you know, it's
And
difficult.
also, I'm glad we whitewashed Nelson Mandela, and he definitely doesn't love Fidel Castro.
Right.
I'm
He's
so
definitely not best friends with him.
I'm so comfortable in knowing that Nelson Mandela did not like Libya, did not like Gaddafi or Fidel Castro. I'm saying
Right.
the liberal sensibilities are so comforted by the peaceful and non-communist Nelson Mandela definitely does not fraternize with the likes of Gaddafi or Fidel
No.
Castro.
No, never.
Crazy thing.
Great thing. Great guy. Love him. You know.
Crazy.
Look at my picture I have of him shaking hands with Bill Clinton or whatever. But like, you know, people, it's funny because like people struggle to even accept that like you know, a certain state in the Mediterranean is an apartheid state, let alone, you know, America.
I'm sorry, I can't think. Which state are you talking about?
Come on, you can't think of a certain particular state that's in the Mediterranean that a lot of people forget is literally bordering the Mediterranean.
Libya.
Not just Libya.
See, I got you there.
You did. I mean, wait, no, you didn't, because I know Libya. Libya is more Mediterranean than Italy fucking is. Italy is bordered by
You're
3
talking
separate.
about Italy?
No, we're not talking about Italy.
Not Greece.
Not Greece. Greece isn't an apartheid state.
Are you gonna make me look up a map?
I'm gonna make you look at a map. It's kind of crazy that like I have this conversation with my wife all the time that like people when they think Mediterranean they think like Italy, they think Greece, but never Turkey and never Libya. Even though Libya has like more of like, you know, more land, right? Against
I'm looking at it right now. There's more of honestly the European here. I'll bring up the map actually so we can all enjoy it. The European contribution to the Mediterranean Sea is like laughable compared to like
right,
you know, Libya, Egypt, Israel, Lebanon or Palestine, Cyprus.
So
Turkey.
I'm gonna let you guess, you know, which of those countries, you know, because I'm not trying to lose my job, is an apartheid state.
Dude, I never think of Israel as a Mediterranean country.
Chat, we still have day jobs.
Well, it's just not like, dude, when people like I feel like the Mediterranean is so often referred to as like the Mediterranean diet or something like that is brought up as like Italians and Greeks. Like that's like kind of like that like constitutes the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
Like I feel like whatever like in America they're talking about Mediterraneans, they're like, here it is.
There it is, just right there. That's it. That's the Mediterranean right there. Italy, Greece, where all those other things. But like, no, check it out. Zoom in a little bit closer to Italy because I'm seeing.
We're not going to keep those filthy Slavs in there either.
I'm seeing what
they're not
sea
invited.
is that? It's bordered by 3 seas, so none of it's actually technically in the Mediterranean. If you really want to get technical, right? That's the Adriatic, right? That's the Ionian, right? And then there's the one with the T that I always fucking forget.
What does PS mean in chat?
Oh, they're posting Palestinian flags, bro, which I unequivocally support. I just also need income. And
oh, nice.
until this is way more like, you know, solid source of income.
I don't know if you noticed this, but it says Mediterranean Sea, and then it says updates from customers, and I just want to see like these are the customers of the Mediterranean Sea.
Yeah, see now that looks Mediterranean. You know, that dude looks like he's Mediterranean. I'm sorry, but like Tony Soprano, he don't look fucking Mediterranean. They would not buy Mediterranean Sea again. But it's like, look, there's Montenegro. Look, fucking motherfucking Albania, right? I'm sorry, like I growing up, if you asked me like 5 years ago, yo, is Albania Mediterranean? It'd be like, what the? I don't even know where the fuck Albania is.
Yeah, I'm still hazy on Albania and its existence.
I know that like
I haven't committed fully.
Enver Hoxha supported a certain guy, and that gives to me he sounds pretty cool. The bunkers, people go a little hard on the whole like bunker memes thing, but it's just like, nah, man, those are like defensive fortifications, and if like you're gonna protect your country from capitalist invasion, bunkers are a good way to go. No, I'm talking about Albania.
Was Albania not part of Yugoslavia?
I don't think so. No, they were a separate thing altogether.
My Yugoslavian history is not great. I've read To Kill a Nation by Perenni. It's kind of a short book. I would need to revisit that. But I do have it. I have read it. Sometimes you read a book and you take pieces from it, but sometimes they don't resonate super deeply. But regardless,
we'll get there.
Yeah,
give us time. Learn with us.
So we press forward.
Yes,
valiantly we move forward again. So other analysts argue that the slave trade. Oh wait. Okay. One more thing in the free trade and how it expanded slavery. During this era, the company's market share, this is from 1686 to 1729, when free trade in African living flesh was mandated.
Free trade.
The company's market share, meaning RAC, of the legal trade fell from 100% to 4%, as the hoggish titans of mainland colonies in particular benefited handsomely. So you see what was once 100% monopolistic control of the slave trade from the RAC in England dwindled in just a few decades to 4% at the expense of the private slave traders in the colonies in North America. So to say that this did not have an absolutely monumental effect on the press for independence is myopic.
Slavery was a pretty hot commodity at the time.
The hottest. I don't think there's any more of a hot commodity.
Right. And especially because like they were totally willing, like if you weren't under the RAC, like they were totally willing to like sink your ship too. Like even if you were like a fellow Englishman.
For anyone that wants to like bypass my humiliating lack of knowledge on Yugoslavia, Sam just dropped the necessary knowledge about the regions that did comprise.
Give it enough time, there'll be even more.
More time to embarrass myself?
No, more states that were formerly Yugoslavia.
But that's the thing, like, you know what I mean? Like, I'll be honest about the things that I don't know a lot about. You know what I mean? Like, if I haven't read that many books on Yugoslavia, like, I'm not going to sit here and pretend to be some kind of an authority on that, which I'm not really an authority on anything.
You're good. I mean, like, look, Macedonia
I'm an authority on chapter 2 of the counter-revolution of 1776. That's what I'm currently an expert on.
That list isn't even accurate anymore because I think Macedonia just had a split this year. Like there's now a Southern Macedonia, so don't even worry about it.
It's like there's just like an infinite regress of states coming out of the Yugoslavian state. Is infinite.
Yeah.
Okay, so now that we've established that further by statistical evidence that this caused an enormous leap in the amount of slaves used to develop the mainland colonies, other analysts argued that the slave trade was of such magnitude and importance, requiring as it did force and forts on the land and on another continent, that joint stock corporations were mandated. Let's see here. I don't know. Okay, so to the extent that one of the most significant fruits of 1688 was a quantum leap in the slave trade, it can be affirmed that the Glorious Revolution was a necessary precursor and instigator of 1776, the first stage of a transformation of the productive forces of the Anglo-American economy. One of the sorely neglected and cruel ironies of what has come to be called modernity was that its rudiments, capitalism and early republicanism, were simultaneously a catastrophic fiasco for Africa and Africans. This is like the contradiction that if you ever do read Liberalism by Domenico Lacerdo, or Domenico, that's how I hear Johnny saying it, so I assume that that's the correct way to say it, is that this liberal, which is in itself like, you know, implies like some kind of like freedom from restraint or freedom from, you know, bondage. While these liberal, you know, people like Locke were writing away about the rights of man and property and life and liberty and pursuing happiness, was entirely underpinned financed and propped up by the malicious enslavement and murder and exploitation of non-white individuals, which furnished the entire possibility of this lofty liberalism.
Right. So when you say that he was writing about like all that other shit and property, right? Remember, people were considered property at the time. There was people, millions of people that were considered property, right? So don't think that like he's just talking about farmland and shit. Yeah. He's talking about slaves.
Yeah.
So
yeah, but Johnny,
I just want to reiterate that.
But God made them slaves.
Right.
Who am I, John Locke, to disagree with divinely ordained social positions of slaves?
Oh, depending on like where you fall, even on that divine thing, because he keeps bringing it up, Gerald Horne, that like there's a divide amongst this what would you call it, teleology, theology, or whatever, there are certain divisions within this theology that are actually not in agreement about like people being property.
Yeah. And so I probably sound like a broken record at this point, because when we went over the introduction, I talked about this a ton. And when I read this last chapter, I talked about this a ton. But as more and more slaves come in, the more uneasy Caribbean and other people, other colonizers or settlers get about the growing number, the racial ratios of this, and the danger that presents to them in case of an insurrection. So by 1712, the governor of Jamaica was seemingly furrowing his brow, wringing his hands, and gnashing his teeth about racial ratios, which spelled danger, particularly given how very small a force at best was at his disposal to repress revolts on so large and plentiful an island. This, along with a foreign enemy, the comprehensible apprehensions of the planter class, which they could not conceal from their Negroes, and the obvious insolence of the Africans, which was very great, was a blueprint for a debacle. He demanded from London an addition of white people amongst us, with this important category going undefined, quite typically allowing for the arrival of more problems in the form of dissident Irish and Scots or disguised French Catholics. Or otherwise, this island may be liable to some very unlucky disaster by an insurrection. Very unlucky it would be if the human people that I exploit were to not allow that to happen.
Well, that's like he keeps referring to like, oh, it could be like a disguised Frenchman and stuff, and it's like, honestly, like, how would you even be able to tell the difference? Let's say a Frenchman just has a really good like English accent, like you'd never fucking know,
Right. It's probably a lot easier to change your identity back in these days, I would assume.
Right? I feel like you could just kind of like, if you spoke like at least English and just knew the accents real good, right? And knew like at least like one or two other languages, you could probably fucking just go anywhere. Providing you were, the right complexion.
So, and just to cap this, such was the dilemma of the colonizer. The escalation of the slave trade in the wake of 1698, the Glorious Revolution, and 1713 brought head-spinning profits and mortal danger alike. So that constant rapacious desire for profits, which means that you engage further and further in the the trade of slaves, also has a reaction that is being disregarded majorly in terms of the insurrectionary potential.
Right. Because they are absolutely outnumbered, even more so than they were in South Carolina.
I wish that there was like a just desserts to all this stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah, I know.
Like it only really happened in Haiti.
Yeah. And
like, you know what I mean? We keep alluding to this, like, oh, they keep doing it. They're disregarding it. They keep doing it. But unfortunately, they're like, there was no like mass successful slave revolt other than Haiti that I can think of, right?
That was like, honestly, like the first, what does VJ refer to it as? Like the first proletarian revolution in the world was in Haiti. And like,
sorry,
what were you gonna say?
I watched a documentary on the Haitian Revolution that says that it was like even like proto-socialist in the sense that they were like even like espousing like some like Marxian concepts prior
No,
to
they were talking about what is it? Liberty, fraternity, and what's the other E?
egalitarian.
Yeah, egalitarity.
Yeah, isn't that what it is? I'm sorry.
So something like that. But
We
like,
claim to be a history podcast.
Well, because like the Haitians of the island, they were the working class. They were the people toiling in the soil.
Yep.
You know, like, and so they knew more about it than anybody in like the French Revolution did.
Right. Yeah, more intimately tied to the productive forces than many of the French.
They were the productive forces, because like you got to remember that like, where is all the profit of the Haitian labor going?
France.
Exactly. So like they are literally like the productive forces.
Obviously, if you want to know more about the Haitian Revolution, you can read The Black Jacobins by CLR James. It is like the definitive book to come out on that topic. I've read it. It's not my favorite read in the world, to be honest, but maybe we'll go through it one day. So this, just to kind of summarize this whole situation, and I'm going to bring up a word that really irritates me. Okay, are you ready for it?
Let's hear it.
So the issue was, on one side, a flowering movement critical of mass enslavement, abolition.
Right.
Not least because the danger presented to settlers in islands such as Jamaica, Barbados, and Antigua. So meaning that this was not like purely some altruistic decision for abolitionism. It was motivated by an increasing danger of you getting your heads chopped off by the people that you're enslaving. A effort in self-preservation. And on the other side, those who were seized with the notion of a Brobdingnagian profits. Now, I'm all for highbrow intellectual language. I have a good time using fancy words. You know what I mean? We all do. But like, you gotta draw a line somewhere, man. Like, how?
Where the fuck is he getting these words?
Brobdingnagian.
Brobdingnagian.
Like, sometimes you gotta like be like, what am I writing here? You know what I mean? Like, you know how there's a line, like if you're writing a paper for school, like you want to use fancy language, but like too much of it is just complicated or pretentious.
I figured it out. I know what's happening here. You want to know what's happening here, Pat?
What's happening?
Bro, he's reading these goddamn texts from like the 1700s, like probably for hours at a time. And he's like, gotta be breaking out like a fucking thesaurus from like, the 1850s or some shit to be like, what the fuck does that even mean? What the?
So yeah.
Also, what fucking page is this?
Brobdingnag is a fictional land which is occupied by giants. It's from Gulliver's Travels.
Well, I mean, like he's also like I'm assuming far more like well read than either of us, and that's probably where he's just
right,
grabbing
but at the same time, I'm just saying,
pulling
it's
it
like,
out of the ether, He
really is absolutely stunning on us, and we deserve it. You know what I mean? Like this is our intellectual reparations that are being inflicted upon us.
Yeah, this man will stun on you, and you won't even know it because you got to break out a thesaurus because like you don't even know what the fuck he's saying to you. Like,
so just to reiterate the dichotomy that I was stating there. So on one side, you have a flowering movement critical of mass enslavement because of the growing dangers in the Caribbean. And on the other side, those who were seized with the notion of gigantic profits to be accrued and the Herculean task of taming a continent that it was thought could only occur with mass enslavement of Africans.
Bro, bag-a-dag-a-ling-ding-dong, mass enslavement.
So you have one side of this abolition movement that is like, hey, maybe we need to calm down on this. These people are going to ultimately cut our heads off. And the other half is like, I don't care. I'm getting rich. We got to tame this continent. We need slaves.
Man, I can't stop counting the money, so I keep them coming.
Yo, I can't see the haters. I can't see the abolitionists.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you over this stack of money.
Because y'all broke over there in England.
Oh my god. Fuck.
Let's see here. Man, my eyes are getting bloodshot. I'm sorry, guys. Again, I just had a final exam yesterday. I have another one tomorrow, and I have an entire project that I need to finish by Saturday. I'm absolutely exhausted. I'm doing my best to hang in there with you guys.
Bro, I like the fact that we're even streaming right now is a miracle.
It's a miracle. It's a miracle. So now we can go from Jamaica, which we were just talking about. So we gave evidence for the Jamaican expansion. Let's talk about it in the mainland. By the spring of 1701, Africans were selling better in Virginia than in Jamaica. As early as 1762, it was estimated that most of the enslaved in Virginia came to the colony directly from Africa and were never seasoned in the Caribbean, which itself was a mixed blessing. Since they had come from the latter, they might have learned the basics of revolt in training schools in Jamaica, Barbados, and Antigua. And if they had come from Africa, then they may not have been acculturated into revolting. Shortly thereafter, a top Virginia leader was opining that the fear of enemies by sea, except pirates, had been reduced. But he just has like an irrational fear of pirates. He's scrolling down his declaration. He's like, fear of enemies by sea, except pirates. Are the pirates in the room with you now? But the insurrection of our own Negroes and the evasions of the Indians are no less to be dreaded. So now we're seeing like a market turn of like, we're not so worried about the other colonial powers coming here and doing anything. Now in Virginia, we're becoming more concerned with the slaves and the indigenous, rightfully removing the heads from our bodies for the atrocities that we commit.
As they should.
Yeah. I feel like I always need to throw that in there just to make it seem that I'm like, oh, like I'm not like clutching my pearls at that thought. Okay, so again, the tug of war between the RAC and the private traders, with the latter emerging triumphant as we've been discussing this entire time, did bring the long-awaited slaves to the colonial plantations. But part of the package was a surge of instability brought by the arrival of more infuriated Africans. The instability was magnified by continually disturbing reports coming from the Caribbean and Panama about various fugitives and the Maroons, who we covered several times, who had attained a degree of freedom and it was feared had murderous designs on settlers. So now,
which they absolutely did.
So now we had, now we have this these whispers from the Maroons that the English were forced to negotiate with, have them not take the entire island. You might hear some slave communities in the mainland be like, well, the Maroons did it in Jamaica, so now we're seeing more slaves coming directly from Africa to take off that taint of insurrectionary fervor from the Caribbean. So that's most of what I have just here in terms of notes. I actually have a couple videos that kind of take like a really interesting take on all of this, and as it relates to capitalism, and even as it relates to the banking industry. So let's bring those up to kind of conclude here. Do you mind if I just go pee real quick before I start that? And then okay, because I actually want to watch the videos myself. They're pretty short and interesting. So just hold it down for like 30 seconds. I'll be right back.
Yeah, bro, I got you. Oh man, I have like a cold, and it's like going in between post nasal drip and just like feeling exhausted and loopy. And I'm really thankful that this is a 2-person stream, because this would be hot dog shit right now. If it was just me, and I'm really glad that this is a 2-person operation. Fucking real favorite slave uprising, discontent. It's kind of funny that every time, I don't know if there's any other punk heads in chat, but every time I read RAC, all I think is rock against communism, which was like this like really like right wing, like, you know how like the Proud Boys and shit tried to say that like, oh, being a conservative is like the new punk. Thank you, Dorian. Well, like Rock Against Communism was a thing from like at least like the 70s or 80s, where like, you know, it was like punk and hardcore that was like anti-communist, and it's like the weirdest, goofiest shit ever. The Liberty Boys.
Are you just silently sitting here?
No, I was just talking about Rock Against Communism and how it's like the weirdest, goofiest shit. And how it's like kind of like even before, like, you know, Gavin McInnes and all them were trying to say like, oh, being a conservative is like the new punk rock.
Oh my god, dude. Yeah.
Like, no, it isn't.
Yeah. So here's a couple cool little things that I found that kind of touch on this specific thing, but also bring it a little bit further out.
Where did finance come from? London and the Dutch, and then later on the Americans. And that therefore what you're looking at is an international system of financing of the slave trade. Then you ask yourself, who insured these things? Because ships don't go out unless they are insured. And the people who insured these things are bankers from all over. Everybody was involved with the slave trade. The Americans, but the French, the English, the Dutch, the Portuguese, the Spanish beginning and then kind of dropped out and then did what they call the asiento, which they would then give permission to other people to do. So what you then have is therefore an international involvement of the colonial world in the actual shipping of human commodities to the new world. So the commodities that the enslaved produced, where did they go? They went all over. They went all over the world. So there was an international trading system. I would argue it is the formation of capitalism, right? And that you can't think through the business of capitalism itself without not thinking about the ways in which both the slave trade and racial slavery shaped how capitalism emerged. Some of the actual practices of capitalism itself were created because people had to account for the people on the ship, the slave ship. So the question of insurance and how we think today of questions of insurance, all of those things are rooted in this early period of capitalism that really turned people into commodities. And I would then argue that one of the difficulties that we have in the modern contemporary world is this commodification process of the way in which you turn people and people become commodities. All of that is rooted in a longer history of slave trade and racial slavery. And that's how the thing shapes the modern world. It shapes it economically, but also it shapes it up here. It shapes it in our head.
Because, like Michael Parenti talks about, in Inventing Reality for the millionth time, capitalism is more than just an economic model. Capitalism creates a culture.
That was a pretty good video, right?
That was a beautiful video. Thank you, Pat.
All right, so I have one more. And, you know, I'm not big on sharing vice, but...
Look, every once in a while, you know...
Every once in a while, you can have a little vice as a treat.
Broken clock, right twice a day, right?
How banks made money from slavery. Empires of dirt.
Yeah, this is like a whole series I got.
Banks never use. Banks even text you when your account is overdrawn. Banks are so important that when they get into a mess, the government bails them out, unlike the rest of us. But did you know that the banks that exist today, maybe even the bank that you use, were built off the back of slavery? Empires of Dirt, a show about Europeans getting rich at the expense of everyone else. From 1619, 11 million African men, women, and children were stolen from their homes and put to work on the sugar, tobacco, and cotton plantations of America and the Caribbean. Their forced labor helped build Britain into a global superpower.
And even after slave owning was abolished in Britain, the British taxpayers still paid £20 million. That's 40% of the national budget, or 16.5 billion in today's money, as compensation for slavery. No, not to the slaves. The money went to the owners. Not a single penny was given to those who had been enslaved. The amount borrowed was so huge that the debt wasn't paid off until 2015, which means that if you paid tax at any point before that, your money went towards compensating slave owners. All four of the UK's largest high street banks have been linked to the slave trade by way of these compensation payments for their loss of human property. Barclays Bank was founded out of a merger with a colonial bank that helped fund the British Empire, and several senior Barclays bankers were involved in the slave trade. Through HSBC's merger with Midland Bank, one of its first managers, George Pollard, received £230,000 of today's money from British taxpayers as compensation. In exchange, he gave up 134 enslaved people on the Caribbean island of Nevis in the 1830s. The president of Lloyds Bank, John White Cater, also received compensation for estates in Jamaica in 1835. And 27 former members of the Bank of England were linked to slavery in the 18th and 19th centuries, including 11 former governors. Even after Britain abolished the slave trade in 1807, we continued to profit off it. Bankers just pivoted to indirect means of making money from the exploitation and trafficking of human beings. The City of London provided the finance for slave traders all around the world, and loans were one way of making money. So a British bank would loan money to a US plantation owner to buy more slaves or agricultural equipment. If you think mortgages are secured against the land you own, think again. So-called plantation mortgages, where US slave owners would borrow money from British banks, were secured against the value of the slaves they owned, not their land. The Royal Bank of Scotland offered plantation mortgages. So did Barclays. These mortgages were then bundled into bonds and sold to investors all over the world. When the US slave owners made repayments, the people who owned those bonds made a small profit. The City of London has defined British wealth for hundreds of years. Money comes in and money goes out to countries all over the world, and our status as a global power rests on our financial institutions. But the labor that built many of these institutions was enslaved. Iconic buildings like the Guildhall in the heart of the City of London epitomize Britain's involvement with the slave trade. Between 1660 and 1690, 15 Lord Mayors of London were shareholders in the Royal Africa Company, which shipped more African slaves to the Americas than any other institution in the history of slavery.
Did you see the logo?
The statue of William Beckford Sr., twice Lord Mayor of London, still stands in the Guildhall to this day. Beckford grew rich off the toil of slaves he owned on 20,000 acres of land in Jamaica. The Royal Exchange was the heart of the City of London, where stocks were bought and traded from all over the world. It was funded by Sir William Garrett, who helped to develop the Moroccan slave trade in the 1500s. So the blood and toil of African slaves literally helped build the bricks of the City of London. Following the Black Lives Matter protests, the insurance company Lloyds of London agreed to pay reparations to Black community groups for its involvement in the slave trade. Campaigners are calling on the banks to follow suit. So when you go to withdraw cash from an ATM, remember that it was your bank that was complicit all those years ago. Slavery built the financial institutions we use today.
Yeah, sure. I bet they really aren't. We can't change what's gone before. It's only going forward. Blah blah blah. Was never involved. Fucking.
Yeah, that was a couple things that I pulled up just to kind of like tease out that connection up to a more contemporary view of it. Like, did you know that I guess England just paid off the $20 million loan that it pulled out to compensate slave owners?
Yeah, it was what was it, 2010 or something?
It said 2015.
2015. Oh no, I'm thinking of Haiti. Haiti was forced to reimburse England until, or was it
England or
France? It was
Yeah.
France. Until like 2010. They were still paying off the compensation to the
I was just looking at this. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but this is US Today fact checking it, and after all this, our ruling true. So apparently USA Today believes that it's true.
Look at that.
The British government only paid off its obligations to former slave-owning families and organizations in 2015. When this fact gained public attention, it turned into a major controversy in the United Kingdom, which has since been reignited by international reckoning over anti-black racism and social justice. We rate this claim true because it is supported by our research. True.
I think the fact that Sam brought up that, like, you know, they said last time something about like it changing the way the Gulf Stream works or something. No, it turns out it changed the migration patterns of sharks.
Oh my god. Well, that's that's morbid.
Yeah. That's a horrifying little detail. We really are truly living in the Holocene.
As it explores the role of sharks in the Atlantic slave trade. Like, I don't know why that's worded very funny to me. Like,
it's like a slave trader shaking the fin of like a shark, you know?
Yeah. And the sharks are like in the little capitalist monocles, and, like, we can eat, and you're saying we can eat all the ones that. Well, to be honest, that's about all the content that I have prepared. You know, we were only dealing with about a 20-page chapter, and as we were going through these chapters, it's becoming more and more of a repetitive theme, which is important for really driving home, you know what I mean, these mechanisms and these dynamics that are fueling this, and it's just important to like continue just more and more evidence of the theses of the book. So it may seem like we're talking about insurrectionary movements and this concept of artificial whiteness and the growth of privatized industry, creating like dethroning these old monarchy institutions. But I think that's important for us to really understand in terms of the birth of quote unquote modernity and how that happened and how it relates to the slave trade. So I don't know what the next chapter.
How long did the Rock Against Communism last?
I think it still goes on today.
No, I mean, like, I'm sorry, I meant the Royal African Company.
It was extinguished like less than a century after 1688. I think like 1750 or something like that. It was officially done, but it dwindled extensively. Like I said before, it was down to like 4% of the legal trade market just a couple decades after.
Because apparently, when it was founded, it was given a term of 1,000 years.
Yeah. I don't know what the fuck that means.
Yeah, the RAC had been given
who sincerely sits down in front of a piece of paper and goes, "What do you think? 1,000?
1,000 years.
1,000 years."
You know, the Royal African Company, Hitler. You know, I'm sure, like, you know, somebody, you know, involved in the American government. But yeah, the RAC had been given an unrealistically optimistic term of 1,000 years, not unlike the Reich it anticipated.
Are they referring to Nazi? Is he referring to Nazis there?
Yes. Suggestive of the ambition of this business and how uncooperative.
Well, Johnny, I wouldn't say that so confidently. I don't know if you know, but there's been multiple Reichs.
Yeah, like 4 of them, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like, I feel like the third one was, or no, wait, no, the Nazis were the Third Reich.
Yeah.
All right, and the fourth one, I guess, is America.
Some would say. Jim Mars. When I was in high school, I used to read this like heavy conspiracy author guy named Jim Mars, and he has a book that I read. Like, this is when I was like, man, like I could have gone way in the wrong direction if I didn't get maybe drugs saved me from going further down that rabbit hole. but like just like super conspiracy, like zeitgeist, like loose change.
Yeah.
These types of books. Jim Marrs, The Rise of the Fourth Reich. This is a book that I owned in high school, and I read it. I was reading books. I don't know if they were good books, but there were
Bro,
some
I was
books
not
that-
reading shit.
This explosive new book by the legendary Jim Marrs, author of the underground bestseller Rule by Secrecy, reveals the frightening real possibility that today the United States is becoming the Fourth Reich, the continuation of an ideology thought to have been vanquished more than half a century ago. Very spicy.
I mean, like, look, I know that there are some people that think that, oh, that's such a ridiculous, fucking, accusation. Not really when you think about it, because, like, I mean,
I feel like that's been substantiated much more thoroughly in my reading of like leftism books than it is by this type. I want to see like what the Wikipedia says about this guy. If he's
that's
like,
such a fit. That is like, like hell yeah.
An American newspaper journalist and New York Times bestselling author of books, articles, a wide range of conspiracies. Marrs was a prominent figure in the JFK assassination. Oh, his undue crossfire was source for. Oh, wow. So
I mean, chat, would you not believe this man just purely based on the hat alone?
Just what you expect a secret society researcher to look like. He write books about telepathy and
That's
secret
awesome.
societies. He began his career as a news reporter. Class. I want to see if there's like a.
Oh, dude, he started his career in Texas. I wonder if he knows Alex Jones.
Probably, dude.
They probably ran in the same circles, right?
Maybe some people in chat were too young to know this, but like in the mid 2000s, Alex Jones was kind of like a respected name.
Yeah.
Like he wasn't a laughing stock. Like there was a lot of people that had like InfoWars bumper stickers and stuff like that back then. And that was like a big thing, like InfoWars bumper stickers.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like it was actually kind of like, oh, like this is like somewhat legitimate. And then that just like fell off a cliff. Maybe that was just my interpretation of it because that's where I was.
No, I mean, like, look. And like at least up until like the Obama presidency. Right.
Yeah, that's
until the Koch brothers money started flowing in under the Tea Party movement. Up to that point, right? I'm sure that like that podcast, that the two guys they like cover Alex Jones's entire career, Knowledge Fight. I'm sure they cover this way better, and probably prove me wrong. But like up to that point, he was actually like way more against like the state and shit like that, and he talked a lot more about like blacked out helicopters and shit, that kind of stuff.
Alexander Emmerich Jones.
Yeah.
He's down here on Jim Marrs where it says see also.
Yeah, he definitely would be like a 3-name guy, especially because his dad, I think, like worked for the CIA or something, or his uncle or something.
Alex Jones?
Yeah, bro. You never heard about that?
Oh, what?
Yeah, his like dad or his uncle, like, worked for like the CIA or the FBI or something like that. But like as like a dentist.
This is so funny that his website promotes conspiracy theories and fake news. Because it's just funny because he probably talks about fake news all the time.
There it is. Yeah, his dad was CIA.
Let me see, CIA.
I mean, if you ask me, it definitely tracks, and I kind of.
There's nothing I about it.
That you'd have to look for Central Intelligence Agency probably, or C.I.A.
The word central doesn't appear.
What about his dad? Where is his dad? Father, parents. Father was a dentist. Yeah, for the CIA.
That's what they want you to. That's what they want you to think.
All right, whatever. My point is that like when people say that like, oh, he's definitely some kind of.
No, we don't fucking push around fake news.
All right, I'm not trying to cover fake news. I'm not trying to push fake news. All I'm saying is like, him possibly being like an op to like take away what?
We could be CIA.
We could be. Everyone is. But like what I'm getting at is that like I think that he subverts a lot of very like, you know, credible stuff, credible accusations by like, you know, making them seem more ridiculous than they are. You know what I mean?
This was a guy. This is stuff that I was reading in high school. This was my.
He was a militia theoretician.
A militia theoretician? Is that what they called him?
That's what it says right there. He has been described as a militia theoretician.
Cooper was killed in 2001 by the sheriff after he shot at them during an attempted arrest. I mean, just for the record, the protocols of Zion are in this guy's book, so let's just put that out there. So, like I said, when I was 15 years old, I was reading this book, and I was reading that, and I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah." Like I was, and like, there's very dangerous territory for like a high schooler to be engaging in. Luckily, I got into my head with some of the right books, and I learned that protocols of Zion is like an absolute bullshit thing.
Yeah. And like, you know, when it comes to like conspiracy theories and shit, as soon as you like hit protocols of Zion, right, or any like criticism of like, you know, like Zionism that doesn't specify like, you know, the Zionist project is not like, you know, a synonym for the Jewish religion, Jewish faith, or Jewish people. You've hit the conservative wing of conspiracy theories.
Yeah. And
yeah, like Sam's saying, the crazy conspiracy theorist characters are on purpose to make reasonable people disregard and to dismiss actual history.
Right. I agree.
You know, just like fucking Parenti has like a whole fucking talk about the JFK assassination. He's not crazy. That man has like more of like a material.
Oliver Stone isn't like an insane person. Like he has a lot of like pretty credible stuff. You know what I mean? I think I have one of his books about Venezuela downstairs.
Right. And fucking what does this sound like? Far right and far left get lumped together. Who fucking tried to push that fucking idea harder than anybody in history? Who literally had like wasn't even in the running for like, you know, an election. So they literally started just adapting and adopting left-wing language, left-wing, you know, aesthetic. Tell me, chat. Tell me. Or just make me sit here in silence. It's a dead air.
Yeah. So, the plot to overthrow Venezuela with a foreword by Oliver Stone.
So,
how the U.S. orchestrating a coup for oil. So, forward by Oliver Stone. He was like buddies with Castro and Chavez and shit, right?
Yeah. Come on, chat. All right, Pat. Far right and far left get lumped in together. Who tried to push that? Who tried to lump far right and far left harder, right, as like this, like the same thing? Who was responsible for like that whole ideological push? That like, and I'll give you a hint: they failed an election, right, or were failing an election, and literally adapted and adopted left-wing aesthetics and characteristics in order to appeal to the masses.
Well, it's not Hitler because he didn't care about all the election.
No, that's exactly what fucking happened. The Nazi Party, literally, like they called themselves the National Socialist Party because
Hitler was made chancellor not by election, but. Are you talking about Hitler?
Yeah, I'm talking about Hitler and the Nazis. They literally like adopted left-wing aesthetics, and that's the whole reason why they even call themselves the National Socialist Party, is because the most like, you know, popular party at that time, right, was the Communist Party, and it was literally between them and like the SPD, the Social Democratic Party.
Because he was never elected, I don't believe. The former chancellor and other leaders persuaded president to appoint Hitler as chancellor. So Yeah, I don't think there was ever any kind of an election. I don't think that was like, it might have been an appeal just for popular support, but I don't believe that Hitler ever was like, or the Nazis
No,
ever went to,
the Nazis lost like pretty fucking hard, right? But my point remains that they did adopt a lot of left-wing characteristics to try and appeal to people. Michael Parenti even talks about it in Black Shirts and Reds, about how, like, you know, they literally just straight up tried to act like, oh, we're also socialists.
well, I mean, and forgive me if I'm wrong. I'm not trying to make any kind of an endorsement of like Strasserism or anything like that. But
Right.
from my understanding, there was more like leftist elements, even though it might have been alongside some very detestable, not leftist social policies. But like in terms of like an economic opposition to like capitalism and things like that did exist, much like other parties. There could be like a left and a right wing that kind of like exists under this umbrella term, and then there was like, I believe, like a liquidation of those maybe more like economically leftist segments of that during the Light of the Long Knives.
Right. And this is, you know, equally right. You know, just
Well,
as
so, and this is the problem, is that if you read Mein Kampf, which I haven't, but I know quotes of it. Well, maybe not even exact quotes from the very beginning. And like Mein Kampf was written very early in Hitler's life. Like
he
it wasn't
wrote it while he was still in prison.
Exactly. And in this, he trashes Marxism throughout the whole thing. Marxism and Jews throughout the whole thing. So like you cannot conflate whatever Hitler believed to be socialism with what Marxism is. There's even a speech where Hitler says, "Oh, you want your socialism? You have your bread. That's socialism."
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, so he made like a very like you know, flimsy, and I do believe that he did utilize maybe that time. I don't know. I know that there's a quote where he's like, "Oh, you want your socialism? You have bread. That's socialism."
Might have been Mussolini.
I didn't spell socialism.
I mean, that's another thing.
I hope you guys are fucking happy.
I mean, because like Mussolini, he was like, you know, a like leftist organizer.
He was a socialist, and his parents were socialists. And when he was young, he like edited for like a socialist magazine or newspaper or something.
Yeah. And like, you know,
but he also imprisoned Antonio Gramsci and fucking murdered other fucking leftists. So it's like,
like, but the thing I was getting at, right, is that like he would, if there was anybody that was going to know how to like adopt like the language and like the spirit of it in to this malignant, cancerous thing, right, it's going to be somebody that actually like knows about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Here, your socialism is Marxism, pure and simple. You see the great mass of workers only want bread and circuses. The ideas are not accessible to them. Yeah, which is like the fucking like antithesis of everything that Marx wrote about.
Socialism does not repudiate private property.
Like, how do you how do you
just and dude, I'm not even clicking on any links. I just typed Hitler socialism quote, and these are the ones that they have here. Like, it's like, you know, it really takes almost no effort to like you don't even have to click something. You don't have to open a book. You don't even have to like wade through ones that are like, you know, nebulous. Like, these are pretty cut and dry. That he's like, I hate Marxism. I love private property. The workers don't get shit, but this is socialism, I guess. You know,
I get this is my idea of socialism, which is also kind of why I'm like always sort of like, look, I'm not trying to like hate on like, you know, anarchists or like, you know, fucking, I don't know, anarcho-communists or whatever, right? It's just like there's like a specific idea here that has worked right in other countries, and it's like, if you're not acknowledging actually existing socialism in the world, it's just like, have you ever thought to ask yourself why? and it's just like, you know, are you actually like learning, and are you actually addressing like the material like things that led to that actually existing socialist project and why it is the way it is, even if there are things that, you know, that you disagree with, right? I understand that, like, you know, any good communist should like critically support everything, you know, scathingly critically support though, right? It's just, I don't know, man. You know what? Am I even making any sense at this point? I should
All
probably
I
just
really, all that I say is just like read about it. You know what I mean? Like just get books, read. You know what I mean? Yeah, that is. Yeah, exactly.
My imaginary city upon a hill. That's the real revolution. That's the real socialism.
There's a quote from somebody that's pretty interesting that says that, like, I guess you could call it like this type of perspective that Vlad's talking about, like that it's so fortunate to only have like this idealized fantasy version of socialized of socialism that it never had the blemishes of reality on it, like, because like anything that like or like it's almost the ones that like almost achieved that failed in their achievement because they never got a chance to suffer the realities of being a fucking society.
That's either Parenti or Lacerdo. It's one of those two.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's probably Lacerdo because, like, you know, he was legit, and like literally up until like his dying day, right? We're talking like, what, he died in what, like 2019, I think? With like a brain tumor?
Maybe. Let me see. Uh,
2018. So even up until 2018, he was still firmly supporting China and the socialist, you know, project in China. That's from the book, you know, that one.
People hating on him.
To say that like Western Marxism is a false split, like, bro, you're so wrong. Like, and that book is, I think, coming out soon. I think it's either coming out this.
Oh, really? This isn't out yet?
I don't think so. No, I mean, well, it's out technically, but not in English. It's being translated, and I think that guy Gabriel Rockhill that I'm always yammering on about is helping the translation of it. So at least it's not being translated by like a fucking lib.
Western Marxism, so a survey of critical theories and debates about the Soviet Union. It's kind of interesting.
Nah, it's not him, man. That's Marcel.
I'm saying it's interesting, dude. Calm down. Chill the fuck out. The amount of sources the author has studied is staggering. The book has encyclopedic value and is accessible to all scholars interested in political history. Since the Russian experience is still used to vilify the idea of socialism, debate remains relevant. Van der Linden has now produced a comprehensive scholarly account of the arguments. The Russian question was an absolute central problem for Marxism in the 20th century. Numerous attempts were made to understand the nature of Soviet society. Here, Marcel van der Linden describes the development of these theoretical contributions since 1917.
Where is he a researcher at? Sam, his see his episode on the East is a podcast with him where it just turns into a therapy session. Are amazing. But like, here, I'm gonna grab something real quick. So this book, right? If you want to know about like the philosophy element of Marxism, right? I think that this is an excellent starting off point, and it's literally like made to be like baby Kami's first introduction into like Marxist philosophy. And so far, I think it's a great read. I'm obviously not that far into it.
Sorry, I'm reading these reviews. Okay. God, my eyes are starting to hurt.
Yeah, I think we'll probably call it a night.
Oh, all right. Well, tune in Sunday night. Hopefully, I'm not dead. For Revolt, Africans conspire with the French and the Spanish, which means that obviously the Africans on the mainland are probably not so happy with their English or colonial slave masters, and maybe see a relationship with the opposing colonial powers, French and Spain, as a necessary evil that could help improve their situation. So thank you, Sam. I promise I won't die. I promise. Thank you, Dorian. I appreciate you guys so immensely for being here and supporting us and constantly participating in the chat. Knowing that we have some degree of like a dedicated audience is very motivating to continue doing this. Obviously, we're off to a slow start. We're trying to be as thorough and diligent and as principled as we possibly can in the production of this interactive podcast or the stream or whatever you want to call it. So
the book club.
So we're going to keep doing it. I'm about to eat some chips and then I have to study for my final tomorrow. So
you do great, Pat.
Thank you. Love you guys. Talk to you on Sunday. Thank you.
Everybody, be good. All right, chat.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you guys.
I am that your options are Bleep Blop Ben or Famous Horse. I'm kind of leaning on Famous Horse only because I know that he wasn't able to stream for a while, and I know he's stressing out about like.
Thank you, Vlad.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Dorian.
You guys are the best. Talk to you soon.
Either one. All right. Be Famous Horse. He's fun. So we'll see you guys Sunday. Lost Salam. Stay strong out there. All right. See you soon.